You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 99. Today on this very special 5-year anniversary episode, I'll be talking to Dan Black and Jess Siemens of Landland. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to leave a rating. It really helps out. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at Art Affairs Podcast. So before I dive into introducing my guests, I wanted to call attention to the fact that this is the 5-year anniversary episode, which is wild to think about. When I first started this back in the fall of 2019, I had no idea whether anybody would be interested in listening to anything that I actually put together. And if I'm being honest, it probably didn't really factor in a whole lot to the decision of whether I was going to do it or not. And you've probably seen those videos recently of Rick Rubin doing interviews on social media. And there's one thing in particular that he says in a lot of his interviews about how when you're making something, whether it's art or music or whatever your creativity manifests, you're not making it for other people. You're making it for yourself, because you want that thing to exist in the world. And, other people also liking it is like a really rewarding bonus, but it's not like a central motivator, You're making it because you want it to be a thing. And this was just something that I thought would be good if it existed. But the fact that the show did end up resonating with a lot of people is not lost on me, and I feel really fortunate to have had that been the case. And I'm humbled by all of the support that so many people that I have an enormous amount of respect for have been giving me, all along the way. And then the amazing group of people that have been kind enough to throw even more support my way by joining the show's Patreon. It really means so much, and I'm so grateful. I'll have a bit more to say about the current and future state of the show at the end of this episode, so definitely stick around. All right, so today's guests are artists Dan Black and Jessica Siemens, the artist and screen printing duo otherwise known as Landland. I've actually known Dan and Jess for longer than any other guest I've had on the show, besides Rob Jones and Mitch Putnam, whom I've known for a little bit longer. So yeah, having them on as guests for this extra special episode really meant a lot to me. Dan and Jess have been working together in the form of Landland for around 17-ish years now, but they've known each other and have been doing different kinds of work together for even longer. On the show, we talk about how the two first met and how that friendship ultimately blossomed into the art and screen printing studio that they continue to run today. We also talk about each of their unique artistic styles and strengths, and how they come together to create a project. Their individual creative processes, taking an idea all the way to the printing press. The many different types of projects that they work on throughout the year, including their own record label, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dan and Jess. Dan, Jess, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you guys on.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Also worth mentioning, this is the 5-year anniversary episode, which is interesting. I think I've known you guys longer than any other guest that I've had on, except for maybe Rob and Mitch, which I've known a little bit longer. But so it's interesting to have y'all in this formal setting, which I don't know how formal this is, but different. I'm usually talking to you in different circumstances, so I think those will be interesting. It's also worth mentioning that in less far less pleasant news is that this has been recorded a few days after the horrific results of our country's most recent election. So I admittedly have been very distracted, and I'm sure a lot of other people have, and a lot of emotions and feelings bubbling around, which I don't normally have when I'm recording these. So I just wanted to call that out at the beginning. But maybe let's start there. Loaded question. How are you guys holding up?
Well, to be really honest, I'm devastated by the outcome. It's like, I can't believe that we're going to do this again. But I feel like since 2020, there's been part of me that's like, was 2016 the fluke or was 2020 the fluke? You know, like 2016, it was very tempting to tell yourself that this was, I don't want to say not who we are. I think we all understand the problems with that. But you wanted to believe that people didn't totally know what they were voting for.
Right.
That we went through those 4 years and it was like, okay, you would want to believe that people saw why this was bad. But because 2020, it was like the pandemic, it was such weird circumstances. I feel like I never really, it's not that I didn't believe it, but it's like I never knew for sure which one of those two was the fluke, do you know? Yeah. And I feel like I've actually almost been more anxious since 2020 about what was going to happen in 2024, especially with all the Stop the Steal stuff, especially with, it being clear that he wasn't going to be held accountable. He was going to be able to run again. The party was still behind him. I've been so anxious about what was going to happen in 2024 and what it was going to say about which one of those two was the mistake. And especially in the last few months, I haven't been able to think about anything else. Like, I've just been consuming information about it nonstop. Like, and I don't know what for, but just to like get some kind of a handle on like, which one of the other two was the aberration. And so there's a way in which I'm not happy. But I feel like this
the weight is off your shoulders.
The anxiety, and I'm a very anxious person in general, but it's like the anxiety of not knowing, and it wasn't, obviously there's a lot of unknown ahead of us now, but I feel like I know like what we're like,
our marching orders, like we have work to do now.
Right, exactly. And this big thing that's the thing that's so disturbing to me about this whole thing is like, would we do this again? Are we this? I don't want to. There's words I don't want to use. It's hard. Is this really what we want?
Right.
And it is. And it's good to know. It's good to know in a weird way. And I feel like so much less anxious than I have for kind of like 8 to 9 years, which is a weird thing. But I feel it's like it's like the curtain,
the mask's off.
Yeah, and it was like transparent before, but hazy, and you couldn't really see what was behind it. It wasn't, and you could like, you could tell yourself it was this, and then you could tell yourself it was this, and now it's just like, poof, like like this is what we're doing. Like we're doing this, and now I can kind of like move forward in a way that I feel like I've been so, and this will probably come up later in our conversation, with my relationship to our work. Like my brain has just been like stuck, and I actually feel like this block is gone now, and I feel creative again in a way. Just in the last couple of days, I know it's really weird. Like I suddenly have a ton of energy, and I can put like my
unexpected
brain,
outcome. That's cool.
Yeah, and I'm not. I mean, I would rather have come to this, and that may have happened if like Harris had won by a decisive margin too. Like it was. I really think it was like just this anxiety. I don't know. Yeah. I know it's a really long answer, but
no, it's good. What about you, Dan? How are you feeling?
It's interesting because leading up to the election, like, I mean, Jess can attest to this. Like, I was like a maniac in like one-on-one conversations. I was like a maniac, like amateur pundit. You know what I mean? Like, we
would do, get us together.
I mean,
it was just like,
oh, it was insane. It was insane. I think I was like,
I'm sure we were in
driving people crazy because I was just, just going and going and going. And I was alarmed by my reaction of like, deep down, I think I saw that this was probably what was going to happen. You know what I mean? I'm in touch with a lot, like actively in touch with a lot of people that vote that way, and kind of like it I come to different conclusions with the information that's around us, but I can't make as much of a cartoon out of people that vote that way as a lot of the people that I was seeing on Facebook and whatever else. You know what I mean? Like it's not like an abstract thing. So I kind of saw some of that, the writing on the wall a little bit. But as soon as it happened, I'm just like numb. And I don't know if it's because, like, as we were talking before, like I'm in Oklahoma City right now, passing through town to, like we had like a surprise family reunion for my grandparents down here. And I mean, it was like, I don't know if I was like numb because I knew I was like kind of going into like I love all these people, but like a belly of the beast where it could have been a cage match, and it wasn't at all, not even remotely. But I think part of me was like, I don't know. I had this like instant, this was surprising. I had this like instant allergy to like the blocks of the big paragraphs. You know what I mean? That like everybody felt compelled to like put their big paragraphs with their big thoughts on why everything happened the way it was, and like all the finger pointing and all that stuff that like, I guess in an academic sense, it makes sense to try to like digest it all that way. But it immediately to me was like, this does not measurably do any good. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that it's important for me to know who to be mad at. I don't know, like, why don't, there's a bigger task ahead of us. Like we got to where we got to. And I don't know, I don't know. It's weird. My reaction was very, very different than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
When Dan and I talked, because of course we talked pretty quickly after it was clear what was happening. I think like we both kind of said, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but we were both kind of like surprised at how not surprised we were.
Yeah.
Like when it was becoming clear on the night, I was staying up to watch the returns, and I went to bed before it was called for sure, but it was pretty clear. And I was really, in 2016, I was totally not expecting that. But I was really surprised at how not surprised I was this time. And it was kind of sad to realize, but it's like I wanted to believe that it could go the other way, but
yeah. And I think numb is a good word for it. I felt that way too. And I don't know if it's just like various stages of grief, and like that's just one of them. But
I think that's real.
Yeah.
I've definitely, there's been like very distinct
right.
Like every day has been different, but it's like dominated by one emotion that is very different from the emotion the day before.
So dialing back the calendar a little bit and distancing ourselves from that unpleasantness a bit, I want to dive into y'all's background a little bit more. And, maybe starting with you, Dan, I know that you spent a little bit of time in Utah. I'm not quite certain what that trajectory from Utah to Mankato was, but I know at least for the handful of years at the beginning of your life, you were in Monticello, Utah. Monticello?
Okay. I'm sure that there's a more regal way to pronounce it, but locally they say Monticello.
So tell me about that. What was that trajectory from a desert town in Utah to Minnesota?
Man, this is a funny way to start. This is a funny way. I was born in Texas. I lived the first few years of my life in Texas, and my mom left my dad at a certain point. Me and my sister and my mom and we moved to Monticello, Utah. I had grandparents there and some family, and yeah, I was there until I was 8 years old. It was I mean, Jess has heard all this stuff like ad nauseum kind of, but I mean, it was weird. It was like a weird thing. We were remarkably poor. Like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny. When I think about this stuff and like the idea of like putting it on the record or whatever, like my very first thought is that there are too many of these people that are still alive to really talk about this with like a real openness. But I think I'm finding out now, you know, I mean, I'm finding out now that it was actually like a pretty traumatic time. Like I had a pretty traumatic childhood. We, I mean, and I've processed it. I've processed it like fairly well, I think, but we were, you know, my mom kind of fell in with some, you know, in that town, it was largely all, you know, practicing like LDS, like Mormons or whatever, or there were all these sort of like ex-Hells Angels that left California or whatever and like wanted to disappear in the desert. So they moved to this small town, you know, it was like, I think it was like sub 2,000 people when we were there. And when I pass through there now, it's like, it feels ghost towny. I mean, there's no resources. There's no, I mean, there's people that live there. I don't know. I don't want to, you know, but it's small and it's isolated and it's secluded. And we were especially so because, you know, my mom had these friends, that, you know, started auto body shops or like doing whatever in town and stuff. And we were like destitute, like actually like, you know, we had no electricity for like a large spell of that, you know, I mean, it was like pretty rough. We were the people that like, you know, when Christmas would come and stuff, like people from the town would just mysteriously put like, you know, boxes of groceries and stuff on our steps and
just for Christmas.
It was like Christmas, and I mean, yeah, I mean, we had like the Boy Scouts like come in to like give us their old toys, and like, you know, I mean, it was pretty clear. Like our, you know, we lived in this like weird fourplex on the edge of town, and like our, you know, our neighbors ate the stray cats that were around. I mean, it was a weird time. It was like a really weird time, and then, you know, there was some. You're getting like the heavily redacted version of this, but I mean, my mom.
You could do a whole podcast on Dan's childhood. It's very interesting.
I mean, it was a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm of like, you know, my mom being in a real fragile place and raising two kids on her own, you know, like completely without much in the way of like resources or anything really, being in a place that had no outlet, no contact really with like the outside world. Like I have like the 80s for me, you know, like everyone talks about, you know, like all these like touchstones. I have like a big black spot where it's like I was trying to make like spaceships out of garbage, and I was breaking into like closed down stores, and I was, you know, like my sister and I had like a place that it was like a fake Playland thing that, I mean, we call I don't know if I've said this out loud in this context where we're talking about Landland, but we had a thing called Sandland that was, it was, for us, it was like this weird thing that we knew how to break into, but it was, what it actually was on the edge of town where we lived, there was a giant building that was full of, it was for like the DOT or something like that. It was this giant building. We knew how to break this lock, but it was like where they mixed cement. It was like where they would make, so we would break into this thing and we knew not to breathe it in, but we would hold our breath and go and jump in these piles of cement powder and like, you know, mess around in there or whatever, and then run back out and like deep breathe or whatever. You know, who knows what my lungs look like now? I have no idea at all. But we would just do these like feral things. And but anyway, so we didn't have a lot else to do. My mom, you know, my mom worked at the dump in town, which, you know, in Utah, they essentially just bulldoze the garbage into canyons. And my mom had this job, quote unquote job, I guess, like kind of pulling stuff out of there. That the lady that ran the dump, who was like this nasty witch, like ex-biker, whatever.
When you say witch, you mean like identified as a witch, not
No. I don't think I think she identified as like a cult leader. I think she, I think she was a terrible person. But
you're calling
as a little
her
kid, my frame of reference, I mean, she was, like she was like a kind of like a gnarly, toothless, like old, like bore all the markings.
Granny.
What's that?
Apple Granny. Sorry, did you not make those as a kid?
I mean, it was insane. She lived in this house. Like we would go over there. She lived in this house, and there was like a family of skunks under it or whatever. So it constantly like smelled. Like I have these like weird fondnesses. I mean, they were also like probably smoking like awful weed in there and stuff like that too. But there were literal skunks underneath. So we would, like all of our clothes, everything like smelled like this thing. But my mom would work at this dump, like pulling salvageable stuff out and so that this lady could sell it at garage sales. That was sort of what we did. Like we just kind of ran around feral for, I mean, my mom was very attentive and like very caring and very, she was good, but there was also a ton of drugs and like, and at a certain point, all these people sort of en masse got a little too religious and sort of, I mean, it was like culty stuff. I don't know what I can say on here or not. It was a really weird time where we sincerely believed that the world was ending very soon. It was like very, very soon. We were catalysts in that. And my mom was going through a nervous breakdown, we found out afterwards, but when you're a kid and a parent tells you stuff, it's, it's like sacrosanct, right? Like they're telling you the truth. So when, when you're raised to believe that you are like an agent in the end times or whatever, you believe that unless you hear otherwise. And there was nothing out there to tell us otherwise.
How did y'all ultimately escape that, though? Because, I mean, a lot of times those types of situations don't end well for the people involved in them.
Oh, no. I mean, like all the kids that I played with then are like not in great shape. You know what I mean? Like there's some dead ones, there's some jailed ones, and there's people that are, it's not, I don't know. It was a weird way to grow up. And I didn't realize, I mean, my mom, to answer your question, I guess, she went into, I don't know if she was like institutionalized or really, but she went into a facility and, we sort of got, during this time that she was getting better, we sort of got passed around, the Baptist church in town. I think they helped us out a lot. And like, we sort of just did little stints in different people's houses and like, kind of getting taken care of by like people in this town. And, there was some stuff after that. Essentially we fled to Minnesota to get out of that situation. My mom's parents were in Mankato, and we went up there to visit initially. And then there was a day where, my mom was just like, hey, Grandpa and I are going to go down with a minivan. Like, can you just give us a list of the things that you want to keep, from memory, your toys and all that, whatever. We're going to go get that stuff, and we don't live there anymore. And so they did that. They did this like mission or whatever. And that was, that was it for Utah as far as, there is a lot more to that I just, I don't know if it needs to show up on here, but, I had it was a very strange childhood. I had to grow up real fast in a way that is like, very atypical. And then we got put straight into, I was in 4th grade when we moved, and, my mom, all my cousins and stuff they were in like the Catholic school system in Mankato, and my mom put us in there to be with them essentially. And she knew that it would be, like a solid education, so to go from this thing where, we were sort of responsible in our tiny scenario for this like second coming thing, to get put into like, we got dropped straight into like First Communion and like, like the Catholic grade school situation. And it was really strange, because I was coming from it, from this perspective of like, like, I don't know. I mean, we like this thing that you guys are all talking about, like we waited in the mountains for weeks for this thing to happen, and it never did. So I don't, like I was sort of just like, there's no way on earth that I could be a part of this. You know what I mean? Like it was so strange. I mean, and
you were wise beyond your years.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it was. Cause I mean, certainly that wasn't like a wise place, but.
Well, but I mean, I feel like your strange childhood, resulted in like an incredibly capable adult.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like,
I mean, you're very like resourceful and resilient, and I'm sure that doesn't have nothing to do with what you went through as a kid. Yeah. I mean,
I don't know. It's interesting because I talked to my mom about it now, and she's very open, like she's very, very open about all this stuff. And it is fascinating to like match up what she, was going through during that time and like what, her priorities as far as like, she needed us to be safe. There were all these forces working against her. Right. And then matching that up with like the things that I remember, like I don't know if it's, like I have very vivid memories of being a kid then, even though at this point it's, 40 years ago or whatever. But I think it's that thing where you lock in whether you understand what's going on or not, like you lock in trauma. Like I go back there and like, I know the lay of the land. Like like I'm very, like I know where everything happened. I know where everything is and and what's changed and all that stuff. It's, it's interesting. I mean, it took me a long time to go back there, but now that I do, I mean, I still have this like very unnatural, whatever. It like the place feels haunted to me. Like I can't stay there. I can't sleep in that town. But I have like a fondness for that area for sure.
So as you were going through all of this and making your way from something that was very unsafe to more safe, and kind of graduating out of that environment, when did you take an interest in art like that? I mean, normally that's like when you're in survival mode, like you were, that's like, you're not looking around for things to draw. Like how did you take an interest in art as you're dealing with all of that? I
mean, it didn't feel traumatic at the time. Like I've been drawing since I was a child or whatever. Like my mom did a really cool thing where she, like around the time I was like 2 or so, like she taught me to read as I was learning to talk. So I was kind of learning all of it. And the way that she did that was, a lot of it was like, we would just drive around and like look at street signs and things like that. And like, she would, have me read those things. And it ended up sort of being like a parlor trick at a certain point in time, like I would have to like read newspapers for like, her friends and like do all this weird stuff or whatever. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was kind of drawing and doing stuff. I mean, most of the recreational thing that I remember about, I mean, we would just play all outside like all day long and do this stuff and like kind of, adventure. We had no boundaries, like me and my sister, which is crazy to think of as being like, if I was like 6 and she was 4, like that's the age that we're breaking into buildings and doing this stuff, I mean, it was like weird little beasts. But the whole time, I mean, what I remember is that I was like making things. I was trying to like, build out of, scrap plywood and stuff. I was like, I had this idea that I was like building vehicles to like, whatever. I was like real, obsessed with, like that kind of thing. And, or I was like making, like, I remember I would make these like weird little kits. Like I don't know if it was like a weird entrepreneurial like sense or whatever, but I remember on road trips, instead of like doing activities like, like crossword puzzles and all that stuff or whatever, I was like making crossword puzzles in the idea that I could make a thing for like other people to have this like way to pass the time when they're like sitting in the back of a car or whatever. And I mean, I wish that I had put that on my list of things for, my mom and my grandpa to grab, because I think it was probably adorable, but I was drawing the whole time and sort of like doing that stuff. I never would have thought it was like a job. Like the idea of it being like a job thing was like way, way later. I had a whole lot of ideas about what else I was going to do. Yeah. I don't know. When you're a kid, you're just, you play the hand that you're dealt, like I didn't realize anything that we were doing was weird until I got to that school. And then, like the whole time I was growing up, I had this like real weird natural aversion to like real family structure stuff. You know, like the thing where you go over to a kid's house for a sleepover and you know, they all sit down and eat dinner. That was like the most terrifying thing to me. And partly, I think partly because of the structure, like we didn't have that kind of structure, but also, you know, in retrospect, it's like these parents needed to figure out who their kids were hanging with. And, you know, and I was, you know, like we moved up to Mankato, like we were in a town outside of Mankato living in like the trailer court where like also full of, you know, not great kids, you know, like you know, like it was like a rough place to live. And you know, like we would invite our friends from school to come visit us. And like, I mean, it was awful because like, you know, like I would have like birthday parties and like, you know, 6 kids would come over or whatever. And like by the end of the night, you know, like only a couple of them actually like stuck it out. The rest of them kind of like called their parents and you know, and you know, they got sick or whatever, you know, and it makes sense because I was like inviting, I mean, you know, in retrospect, it was like the real like rich kids that I was like befriending, and, you know, we were all in all the advanced classes together. So it made sense. But, you know, they got to where we were and they were sort of like, yeah, this is too weird. You know, and I think it was like an interesting crash course in like, oh, all the things that I can talk about from my lived experience, it's like alien to these people. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
I sort of grew up with that in mind. And, you know, in a way that was like kind of fun, you know, like I can be, you know, I think I lean sometimes like, sometimes I enjoy like weird confrontations, but, yeah, I don't know. It was a weird thing. It in a lot of ways, it's like no mystery, like how I ended up in this spot where I'm doing what I'm doing, you know?
No, it's super interesting. Jess, was your trajectory as tumultuous? And
No, no, not at all.
I know you've spent a lot of time in like Minnesota, but did you grow up there or was it somewhere else?
Yeah, no, my parents are both from the Minneapolis area, and we lived in the suburbs of Minneapolis until I was 10, and then my family went up to rural Minnesota, like rural central Minnesota. Yeah, I mean, I don't it's weird, like there is like a lot of weird overlap in me and Dan's childhood, but not
It really is.
Yeah, and I feel like we're both affected in similar ways. Although like mine was much more stable, I would say. But yeah, it's funny, like we're such similar people, and I feel like that's a big part of why we took to each other so immediately when we first met, when we were both pretty young. I mean, I was still a teenager when we met. Like even though materially our childhoods are really different, there's a lot of weird overlap, including that like I also, you know, never saw Ghostbusters or whatever. like I also had a weird lack of interaction with pop culture that had to do more with my dad's attitude.
And did you take an interest in making art really young also, or was that something that came later?
Yeah, I mean, I was always like similar to Dan. I, you know, like learned to like read and speak really early. I guess I was kind of like precocious or something. My family, like no one in my family went to college. I wasn't around. I wasn't exposed to a lot of like options. I didn't see a lot of examples. I didn't see a lot of different examples of careers, I guess. And the way that everyone in my family kind of operated was like, you should just do what you're good at. You should just kind of like settle, like find something that you're naturally good at and just like do that. And I was pretty, I don't know where it came from, but I think there were people in my family who I had been told were artists. I have an aunt who's an artist, although I never knew her. I know her really well now, but she lived in Utah, coincidentally, although in Salt Lake City, not where Dan was. But my dad's sister, and I didn't really know her at all growing up for whatever reason, but I knew of her. And this kind of like specter of my artist aunt was pretty inspirational to me, although I had no like actual working understanding of what it meant to be an artist. I just knew she would like make me like cute puppets that I would get in the mail or whatever, and I was like, she's creative. And nobody of my immediate family, though, the people that I knew, were that into art or anything. The art that we had around our house was all like my dad had a crazy record collection, and we didn't, for whatever reason, have any like furniture in our house for a long time, so all the records were on the floor, like leaning against the wall, like probably like 4 feet deep, like multiple rows of records. And since they were at my level, like I would sit there and just like flip through the records. I always had this like voracious appetite for books, but especially books, any books really, but like especially like illustrated books, any kind of images. So I went to the library a lot and was pretty obsessed with children's books. One of the things that I could imagine as a career was like a children's book illustrator, because I looked at a lot of children's books. I was like, someone has a job illustrating this. and then the other thing, I was like, someone has a job making these album covers. And that was basically it. Like I never went to like an art museum or anything. And I never had any like practical conversations about what it meant to pursue, a job as any kind of artist. But my parents were always like, yeah, you're good at it, so you should probably do it. I don't know.
That's cool. And you ultimately went to like a high school that specifically focused on art, right? Yeah,
and I mean, it's called Purpose Center for Arts Education in Minneapolis, or just outside of Minneapolis. It's like a public school. You have to apply to get in. You go there for 11th and 12th grade. It's open to anybody in the state of Minnesota. If you live a certain distance away from the school, you get to live there. So it's kind of like like you live in a dorm, which is what I did. And I live far enough away that I could like stay there on the weekends too. So yeah, like I went at 16, I moved out and basically like moved into this school. It was sort of like a college, but it wasn't like rigorous like a college.
I wanted to go to that school so bad.
Yeah, like, well, and the thing is like, it didn't. I didn't learn. Nothing. Again, I mean, I think it's an incredible resource. And I'm sure it's desperately underfunded, and the teachers were all amazing. But it wasn't so much about learning anything about art or how to be an artist. It was really. I mean, I honestly always thought of it, especially once I was there. I was like, oh my God, this is like a suicide prevention resource for like rural weirdo kids. Because I was very...
That's interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
Oh, I've never told you that.
No. But I can see it.
Yeah. And like, I always... I never fit in. Like when we were in the suburbs, I was just a weird kid that, talked too much. Very opinionated, looked weird, didn't know how to be a girl in a way that made sense to anyone else, was very self-conscious. I mean, I think I was kind of like, well, yeah, so in the suburbs I was terrible, didn't have any friends, didn't fit in, get picked on a lot. Then we moved to rural Minnesota, a very conservative area. To this day there are, actually this is probably more to be expected now, but even back then, 30 years ago, there's Confederate flags all over.
Oh, wow.
Rural Minnesota. Go figure. Even at that age, like, I knew that was not good. And I was like, so in addition to being this weirdo kid who, once I hit puberty too, like, everyone assumed I was gay. So I got bullied for that a lot. And I was also pretty outspoken about things like racism and homophobia and whatever. So I was like constantly getting in fights with everybody about these, I don't know, I guess like rural attitudes about things. So I never fit in anywhere. I was very depressed living where we did. I did not, at that time in my life, I was not an appreciator of like the, beautiful, the natural world. There would have been more to appreciate in that area if I had been a little bit more into that kind of thing. So I wanted to go to the arts high school because I wanted to leave, and I thought there was some chance that I would be able to have friends for the first time in my life if I went somewhere with like other weird kids. And yeah, that's everyone at the school pretty much, I think, especially the kids who lived like outside of the first ring suburbs or the city of Minneapolis. It was like a whole bunch of kids coming together, like having being able to have friends for the first time and not get picked on in quite the same way that we all did in our hometowns. But that's like really what I got out of it, was not feeling like a complete freak.
Did it like reinforce your desire to become an artist, like professionally become an artist?
It's weird, Michael, because, for whatever reason, I've never, it's never felt like a choice that I made. like I don't know that I had a desire. I just was like, it's the only thing I know how to do. I mean, I knew I could like work in food service, which is like what my mom did, or I could find a way to make a living like drawing, but it never felt like, it's weird. It was just like, well, I draw.
That's
and
what I like do.
Drawing. Yeah. And so like, I guess I got to figure out how to do this.
It's also a thing. I mean, because you're good at it, it's a thing that like probably naturally picked up momentum more so than like any other path that might have like presented itself to you, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everyone around me was like, oh, you're good at this. You should keep doing this. But yeah, and I never, like, for whatever reason, I didn't ever think college was an option. My parents explicitly told me that
that it wasn't an option.
Couldn't go to college. Yeah, basically. My parents are funny. I love them. They were very anti-college.
So you didn't go to college at all? I thought I had read that you went for like a year or something, but
So after I met Dan and we had been working together for a while, I think I was 21. I thought, I always had this nagging feeling in the back of my head that does persist to this day, that I should try going to college. But I was so, not having anyone in your family having done it, like, is a really big obstacle. Like, it's so overwhelming. To navigate, just, even the application process. And I don't know how I pulled it off. Like, Dan, you probably helped me because you were.
Yeah, I don't remember, but
I'm sure. At that point.
I'm sure.
I bet you did help me. I bet you did help me. Yeah. Yeah. Because when I met Dan, he was in college. And that was the first time I had ever been around people in my life who had gone to college. It was like when I met Dan's friends, and it was very intimidating. But also this is just a huge shortcoming of mine, but it's like, I can only imagine like how things are possible if I actually like have seen someone do it. It's shameful that that's how my brain works. But yeah, so I did when I was 21, I applied to like 2 art schools and got like a big scholarship at one in Milwaukee and moved there, went there for a year, but I'm, again, just not, it's this, I wasn't feral in the way Dan was, but it's like, I do feel like when you come from a family that is really like kind of insulated and just I'm really different than my parents in a lot of ways. And like, if I had had someone in my life who was like, be patient, or like things there's value in like sticking with something, even if it's not exactly what you want it to be at that moment, I probably would have stuck with school. And then like hindsight, I wish I had, but when I was there for a year. I loved it. I was like very good at it. I was so into it. I took it like, I was a little older than everybody, but I was like, I'm sure I was like obnoxious. I was like, I like, my teachers love me, and I like love my teachers, and I'd like stay up all night, like, like doing everything. I loved it. But I really wanted to be screen printing, which I had already gotten into with Dan. Dan had taught me in Minneapolis. And when I was in Minneapolis, Dan and I could go into the screen printing lab at the college where he worked and like use their equipment and screen print there. And I think at that point we were like doing a little bit in your house or something. But when I went to Milwaukee and I was in college, they wouldn't give me access to the print lab until I was a major and until I was a junior.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I can't wait another year. And I was like, what is the point of being in this college? The other thing was the school I was going to, wasn't open 24 hours a day, which I didn't, because the school Dan was going to in Minneapolis I just like assumed that all colleges or art schools especially would be open 24 hours and that you'd have access, because where you're supposed to do your projects, like if you're in school, it's insane, right, Dan?
MCAT had such amazing access 24 hours that, most of the time that Jess is talking about here, I was not actually a student. Like I had,
right.
There was like a year and a half that I had dropped out, and I was like,
we were just going in.
I don't know. I mean, I worked at the print shop. Like I helped build the print shop. Like I understand how to get in there. You know what I mean? Like we would just go print, and like
those were the days.
There was no, I can say that now because that place is very, very locked down. It'd be, like I'm not inspiring anyone to go do that.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like,
this is like,
2002. But no, that was the deal, is that like we could just go print anytime we wanted, and as long as we weren't in anyone's way, nobody asked anything about anything, and I had, my roommate and I, like, we worked as like on like we did like work study, like rebuilding the whole screen printing part of that thing or whatever. So like we knew it, front and back and all that stuff. And we were sort of like a resource for kids in the school and all that. So it was very natural for me to be in there. And then, I got, I was a printmaking major for 3 years, and then my brain sort of broke. Like I was going too hard, like I was like really, like I wasn't sleeping for, I was doing too much stuff, and I wasn't even like a great student, like I don't think any of my teachers there, like, especially like have fond memories of me or anything, like I was not like a, I feel like I was probably more annoying, but I was also staying, like there was a finals week where I stayed up from, Sunday morning to Friday night straight without sleeping. And, like I was not living a healthy life.
That's a huge surprise that you
I know.
do a lot overnight.
I don't know why this is news.
This is so much more measured than it used to be. Like college was insane. Like I remember that week in particular, like, I would stay up, and like my, like my girlfriend at the time and my roommate, like they would finish their work and, go to their respective like dorms or whatever, and like I would just have 8 hours of me time, and then they would show up and they'd be all like new and like fresh faced, and I'd be like this goblin, like just it was not good, and so I ended up I dropped out. It was also coupled with, I think I was like realizing that all the resources were going to get taken away from me. Like I was really into intaglio printing, and I was like learning about like stone lithography and stuff like that, and it and you're not able to do that in like a DIY sense, so, and I think part of me was just like, what am I doing? And I quit for a while, and then that was sort of when I started doing this stuff, and like screen printing. Screen printing is very democratic in that like $100 can get you the ability to kind of like do it in your house if you want to, you know what I mean? And that was like incredibly inspiring. And then I did go back, like I went back and I had changed my major to graphic design and graduated with that and everything. And that was more the time that like Jess and we were doing stuff, like we started during this like weird, I think I was like not in school when Jess and I met. I feel like that was how it went. And then the last year or two of my college time, like we were doing this stuff as much as we possibly could, given our weird schedules and stuff.
So at the beginning of your time at MCAD, when you were printing or printmaking major, and then later when you were a graphic design major, like what was your career goal at that point? What did you imagine yourself becoming with those degrees?
It's interesting because going into it, I like from high school, my sights were set on like architecture. Like I really wanted to be an architect, and there was like this really kind of soul crushing moment where my high school didn't have any kind of resource for that. So my mom signed me up for like this it was I think it was like a workshop. Like we would, a bunch of kids would go and like sort of like shadow a local architect. And I remember there was like a group of like 12 of us or whatever. And he was explaining the stuff, and I'm sure it was like really unstructured and really whatever, but like the main thrust, like he kept asking all these kids, like if they had any like experience with like CAD and like all these like software things or whatever. And, a lot of them did. A lot of them knew this stuff. And I was coming at this from like, I will never have a computer. Like the things that they're talking about, like I just don't have, like, I just don't have access to the tools that I would need to even start learning about this thing. And at that point I kind of just like gave up, you know what I mean? Like I had college applications out to like other places and stuff like that. And I knew I wanted to go to college. I think I just felt limited in a way, and that's a thing that happens when you grow up poor too. It's just like you see all this stuff and you immediately, it's like when you're a vegetarian at a restaurant, like you see the whole thing, but you immediately take out all of the variables that don't apply to you. You know what I mean? And then you just see the two things on the menu that are yours. And that was sort of like, I was like, I'll go to college, here's this thing that I know how to do or whatever. And I didn't really have a goal. Like the thing we're doing now as a job did not exist. Like, in 1997 or whatever, when I went to school, it's not like I was, I don't know. I honestly, in retrospect, maybe I had a plan. I don't remember that I did. Even when I was graduating, when I was like, I want to make band posters and I want to do this thing or whatever, like it was such a deflating and hard argument to make to the design department at MCAD. Like I remember having my like, my like senior project teachers and stuff like that just be like, like what's the point? So at the end of this, you just have like a bunch of posters. Or I mean, it was a thing that was not understood at all. And like I knew that like Jay Ryan was doing it. I knew like I had a tiny bit of exposure to people that were doing it in a way that I was attracted to, because up until like Jay Ryan, like gig posters, like there was nothing appealing about that at all to me. Like I don't, no real disrespect to like the pioneers or whatever of this stuff, but like I didn't have a fondness for that kind of work, at all. And I think seeing Jay's stuff and seeing that you actually could define what a band poster looked like, it didn't have to be so tropey. I think that was like a big tool or whatever, but like then I had the whole argument of, how to sell my school on that, and it never happened. It's, it's not like they invite me back to talk or anything, like it's like, I don't know. I don't think that, I got what I needed to out of it, and it was, I do not regret going. But a lot of that is that I ended up with a really amazing community of friends that I am very close to now and who have, gone on to do cool things. And like, it's like that part I really appreciate. And it also taught me to like work hard. I don't know that I am naturally the hardest worker on earth, but like spending that kind of time and that kind of focus, just, beating discipline into you is, for me, it was very helpful, in a way that I don't know I would have gotten it otherwise,
You mentioned that at the beginning of your time at college, you didn't know Jess, and by the end you did. How did you guys end up meeting?
Yeah, man. We had like a funny thing where like, I think our paths were very predetermined to cross. I'm trying to think, like the first like real contact that we had was that I think this was this was when I was not in school. The first poster that I had ever made for a band that gave me money to do it, and then they took those posters like out of town, was for a band called Sweep the Leg Johnny, who was like one of my favorite band. I mean, they were a force live. They were amazing to watch, but they would come through Minneapolis all the time. And I sort of, the singer in that band, Steve, and I, like, he was a person that right off the bat was like so encouraging, and like actually was the one voice that like I remember first telling me that if I wanted to make a job out of this, I could do it. You know, like it was
Nice.
it was the kind of encouragement that I had not had from anybody really. And he was, you know, I was in this like island where I was making flyers and stuff and for local shows, and he was just like, you know, like Jay Ryan is not a giant company. He's not like a, you know, like he's just a dude that's doing the thing, and he does a lot of stuff because he knows that it wouldn't exist otherwise. And like you could do the same thing. And it was really inspiring. But anyway, so I made a tour poster for them, and they took it out on tour, and they were these like really clumsy things on giant sheets of chipboard, like a really unforgiving material to print on. And Jess was living in Seattle, and she went to go see this band and bought one of these posters. And on the back, I was, you know, like, it's funny because it almost feels like the opposite of like what I want to do now. Like I was, you know, sort of doing the Aaron Draplin, like, you know, the fake, like you're a big thing. And there was a stamp on the back that was like, you know, like this was manufactured at the 2222 screen print facility. And, you know, and I had my email address on there and stuff like that. And Jess saw that, and she had a plan to move back from Seattle to Minneapolis at some point. And I got this email from her that was like very much like, hey, I got this poster at the Sweep Like Johnny show. You know, like I am moving back there, and I'm interested in work. So, and I like screen printing. So if you have, you know, it was like, I think really,
I was like, I don't know how to screen print, but I'd really like to learn.
Yeah. And it was very like, if you have any openings, you know, yeah, it was really sort of like, in retrospect, like really, it was formal, you know, like she had, the bit worked, you know what I mean? Like, and I had to respond this like super humbling thing where I was just like, these things were printed in my living room of an apartment, and, you know, like the screens were washed out in a bathtub. Like I'm not, you know, like I'm not in a position to hire anybody. I'm stoked that you got this thing. That's cool. But like, you know.
And people have to remember, you know, this is before social media. Like,
yeah.
I didn't have a computer. I think I had an email address that I could check like once every few weeks at the library or something. But this isn't like a world where I could be like 2222 screen print facility. Like, let me look at their Instagram account or whatever. Yeah. Like it wasn't like, there was no way for me to confirm whether or not this was.
Well, and there would have been no real way for me to have a presence like that anyway. Like a website, you know, like it was.
And I don't know what possessed me to email this.
It's so interesting. And
I know it's weird because I think it's also further evidence of me just having like just being like, well, I guess I'm adult now, and I'm in the world, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know, because I had actually I had just graduated high school. I tried moving back with my parents for the summer. I like worked at a casino, and I was losing my mind, and I had a friend who had moved to Seattle like a year earlier, and another friend who was driving that way. And I was like, can I just come with you? And then you can leave me in Seattle, and I'll just sleep in my friend's crawl space. And everyone involved was like, yeah, why not? And so that's what I did. And so I was just in Seattle, you know, I like got a job at a deli or something and spent most of my days just walking around, not coming up, not having any goals for the future, just like maybe something will occur to me. And and I went to see Sweet Like Johnny and saw this. And I had taken like I think we had like screen printing day in that art site or something. Like I had made one screen print, you know, a one color screen print or something. And but I was like, something clicked for me when I did it, where I was like, this is the greatest thing.
It is horribly addictive.
Yeah. Well, actually before that, the like one piece of art that my parents had in their house had come from my dad's mom's house, and when she died, he took it. But it was like this cat sitting in front of a thing of flowers, and I would just stare at it as a kid, and it was literally like the only thing resembling like a real, you know, I think it was editioned, so it was like, I think it was an actual print. Everything else I had ever seen was, you know, some kind of like offset reproduction or whatever, like an album cover or something in a book. But I would just like stare at it as a kid. This is how like culturally deprived I was. And I just remember, like, I could see that there were like, it was made from, you know, like 5 or 6 different colors. And I could tell by looking at it that like the colors had been like laid down separately, and that there were areas where the colors overlapped and they made a new color. And it had like just enough, even though it was behind glass, it had like just enough of like a tactile quality that I could see like that these like layers of, I had thought of it as paint, were like interacting. And I was just like fascinated by this, but I didn't know what it was called. And that it would not have occurred to me to like ask anyone if they knew what it was called. Not that anyone would have, or like go to the library and look in the art section and try to figure this out, but I was just I just loved, and I tried to reproduce it on my own with like, I would make stencils with paper and like try to like paint, like poster paint, like watered down poster paint, like quickly to like get it to lay down flat and like do it with different stencil, and I could never figure it out. So I was like trying to invent screen printing.
We had a really funny thing where independently we both like effectively like reinvented screen printing, like with no resources or no knowledge. Wow. Cause I remember Jess mentioning this before, and like my equivalent to that was that I would go and like when I was making flyers in Mankato as like a high school kid for like my bands and like, like friends' bands or whatever, like the copy machines there would be like 4 of them, and 2 would have like black cartridges, but the other ones would have like colored ink cartridges. They were not like a risograph, but like it was just a photocopier that printed in red or blue or whatever. And I would do that thing where I would create separate images to like feed through. It was like, well, here's all the light stuff that gets hit with like the red first, and then I'll go through with the black and like print all the information. No frame of reference for screen printing at all. Like nothing. I did not know. It wouldn't be like another year or 2 until I would learn that even existed. And even then all I knew about was that was how you made t-shirts, but yeah,
as usual, you were, much smarter in your approach than I was.
I mean, I don't know. It was like, I mean, for whatever reason, like I have it in like I don't know. I have to like break the tools that are in front of me. Try to like figure out a way to it's stubbornness. Like what it is actually stubbornness. Like I'm not satisfied by just making a photocopy. I have to like, how do I blah, blah,
Well, it's like a curiosity.
I guess it's curiosity. That's a nicer way to say it. But,
no, it's true.
But no, it was funny because when I learned how to screen print, I was just like, it clicked, and I was like, this is the thing I had been doing.
But you were trying to do the whole time.
Yeah, there's just a much easier way to do it, or not easier, but like a much more reliable way.
When I was at this arts high school, we had like a week unit. I think it was a unit, like a screen printing unit or whatever. And we, so we learned what a screen print was, and I was like, oh, that's like that thing on my parents' wall. That's what I've been trying to figure out. It's just like this giant light bulb went off, and I was so excited. And I don't know what it is about the screen printing that was so appealing to me. But so I did it, for this like week in high school. But then of course it didn't occur to me that I could ever like do it outside of a setting.
It's like a fun activity or whatever.
Yeah. Or like I just like I just don't think very big. It didn't occur to me that there could be a way that I could like pursue being able to do this on my own. And of course, as I said earlier, college had kind of been ruled out as a possibility. So I was like, but then when I got this poster, and I was like, wait, this is like an application for screen printing. Like you can screen print posters for bands. This guy probably makes a ton of money doing this. Like, because bands make a lot of money, right? Yeah. Again, just I'm 18. I'm very naive about how the world works. But yeah, so I was like, I don't know. I guess you just write to people and ask if they could give you a job that you have no clue.
It was sort of the era of like just writing to people out of nowhere. I think email was like so novel. I mean, that was how I got in touch with Jay Ryan. I just emailed him. I think I had seen his work in like was it Copper Press? There was like a magazine that was like doing stuff. And I had seen that, and I just emailed and was like, hey, can I buy some of your thing? And I felt, and that was how we got in touch. It was just an email out of the blue. But yeah, so like Jess and I stayed in touch. Like there were a handful of emails after that. But it
never felt like it was going to
No. It was
result
just
in me meeting you or anything. And that's not why I moved back. I moved back for other reasons. But then I moved back, and it was maybe, I don't know, like 6 months after this brief email exchange. We weren't like staying in touch. And I wasn't like, okay, I'm coming back now, we should meet or something.
Right. No.
It was just like, it was over. He told me I couldn't have a job with him. And I was like, well, I guess.
And then I think it was like pleasantries beyond that.
Yeah. But there was no like, we didn't like strike up a friendship over email or something. No. I think I probably also assumed you were like in your 40s or something, it just didn't occur to me. But then I came back, and pretty quickly after I had moved back, I ran into someone I had known from Arts High, and he was, he knew so I also had been in bands throughout high school, and I played bass. This friend of mine knew that, and he was like, oh, I'm starting a band with a couple friends. We need a bass player. Do you want to be the bass player? And I was like, sure. And yeah, so I went to the first practice and with this band, and Dan was the singer in the band. And I don't know. I mean, we must have just.
It took us a minute.
It took us a minute to realize that we've been. But I think your name is very like distinctive. Mm-hmm. Like I knew I'd been talking to Dan Black, and so I'm sure I was like, "Wait, are you the Dan Black?" That runs 2222 Screen Print Facility. So then that felt. I mean, I think that felt like whoa, like it's kind of like
we have to be friends now.
Yeah. Like it felt like it was meant to be, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But then you discovered that you'd actually played in a show.
Oh yeah,
Jess, you were like 15.
That was like the weirdest. That was the weirdest thing.
I don't know. Was it a while before we realized that? Or?
It was a while because what ended up happening was like the band that I was in high school. We sort of like our friend Bill was the dude who just like kind of followed us around with a camera, which I wish like. I had more friends that just followed people around with cameras. It was cool because there was like a document of this time. Like he took photos of everything, like just us hanging out at Perkins, whatever. But we were looking through.
Has the most well documented high school experience.
I mean, sort of for the 90s. I mean, I bet everybody on Earth now has a much better one. But
keep in mind that at this point, I'm living in my hometown. You're living in your hometown, and this is like 4 hours apart in Minnesota.
In Minnesota. So I was looking through.
Like we're not
photos.
In the same town.
Well, when that show happened, So I was looking through the photos of, like our bands playing shows or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like from these photos of this show that we played in St. Cloud, there's just like, it's like tiny Jess and like tiny Bree. And like, I mean, they're like children playing. And it was a very strange moment where it's like, oh yeah, we played a show with Jess's band.
Wow.
Years before we would have ever met, like,
in a town that also neither of us lived in.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
it was like an out of town show for both of us. And when I was in bands, I was like horribly shy. You know what I mean? Like I don't think we interacted. I'd be surprised if Jess and I talked.
Well, me and my bandmate would have been like 15 and you would have been 20. So
I mean, I just don't think I was like I don't think I was like in the building unless I had a microphone in my hand. You know what I mean? Like I was not, I just wasn't, I was afraid of everything, like I had like, all of the bands I was in was in like I performed as a singer in spite of horrible stage fright. I mean, it was, and I think all the bands I was in there was like an anxiety to them as a product of that. Like it scratched an itch for me, but yeah, no, I don't think that, yeah, we were in the same room, but I don't think we interacted.
No.
But it was a really cool thing to see. It was like a really cool thing to like come across.
Our bands were quite different too. I have a feeling that you didn't like my band so much.
I liked old Modest Mouse.
Well, at one point you were doing a Smashing Pumpkins cover band, I think. Jess,
where'd you read that? No, that's like when I was 12.
Really old? Okay.
Yeah. Me and my friend who I've been in many bands with, going back to, she was my one friend in my hometown. And we, when you have like one friend, it was a very intense female friendship that started when we were 12. And it was based around a love of music and like specifically the Smashing Pumpkins. So it was like 95 probably. We started, she had like a music background, like she has musicians in her family and she, could read music and had grown up playing piano and French horn and stuff. And her dad played guitar and had taught her guitar. And I like learn to play bass, basically so that we could be in a Smashing Pumpkins cover band. But that only lasted for we found some other people our age, other 12-year-olds, I guess, who could play the appropriate instruments. And, we would like practice in my garage and stuff with the goal. I think of like playing people's like birthday parties and, the in the gym at school for whatever events. But within like a few months, Bree, who's my lifelong friend, and I were like, hey, actually, we want to write our own songs. And
Nice.
Our musical tastes were already changing at that point, and nobody else in the band was like interested in the kind of songs we were writing, because we went from being really into the Smashing Pumpkins to being really into like June 44 and like Don Caballero. So we were trying to write math rock type stuff, even though like I was like still learning how to play bass, and it was really embarrassing, awkward music that we were writing. And it also makes sense that these people who just wanted to play Smashing Pumpkins and Green Day and I don't know, whatever, Stone Temple Pilots or whatever, like weren't along for the ride. But yeah, so that was very brief and it doesn't really count because we never like really played any shows or anything.
Right on. So after you guys like met again, after having exchanged like emails, you met through this band connection. Did y'all start like working together at that point, or did you start like recognizing your mutual love of screen printing? How did that become?
Well, we started dating like pretty quickly, and so we were just hanging out all the time. And I was going into MCAD with Dan, and you were teaching me how to do stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure that there was like something where you were making things, and like I was like a facilitator where it's like we could screen print this or whatever, and it was pretty organic.
Well, so I was in another band at that point, and I was like making the flyers for the band or whatever.
We somehow like snuck you into the MCAD like Christmas like art sale thing. Like you made a bunch of pillowcases.
Oh,
like we screen printed pillowcases and like you sewed
weird.
them. I mean, it was a very organic, like we just kind of started making stuff and had the facilities there to like sort of, like make that kind of thing happen. And then it sort of just ended up being a thing where we'd make posters. Like I ended up kind of having this like a contact at First Avenue that would like, let us. So back then it was sort of like just people letting you do things. There wasn't really much money structure involved. And we were making some posters for some of the shows, like mostly 7th Street Entry, like the smaller room shows. And it was just kind of exploring making posters. I don't know.
It was really, really organic. Like we both just like making things. I was excited to have access to screen printing facilities. Dan was a good teacher. And I had a band that needed merch. And so I was like, oh, now I can make it. And then it honestly was just like, I mean, I literally have never had a plan for my life. Like this is very sincere. I never could picture myself like being alive, like 10, even 5 years into the future. Not because I thought I would die. It was just like impossible for me to imagine myself in any kind of future. And I don't just, it doesn't need to turn into a therapy session, but there's a lot of reasons for that. I've spent a lot of time unpacking it for myself, but it never occurred to me that I would like continue to exist in time going forward. So I never felt the need to come up with any kind of plan, and I just would kind of go along with whatever was happening in the moment, and make a lot of decisions just on the fly. But so like making stuff for my band, people just started to be like, oh, do you want to make stuff for my band too? And I mean, I think I did a lot of stuff just for friends and stuff for free.
Yeah, there was a lot of like CD packaging and like things like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
or like, $100 or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas Dan was the one who always had a little bit more of like, a drive
vision?
To like, a vision. Thank you.
I mean, sort of not. I mean, I don't know.
What kind of work were y'all doing to pay the bills at the time? I know, Dan, you were working for Target at one point, doing like with some advertising, maybe.
Before that, I was working at. When I dropped out, I got a job at Kinko's, and I was like doing that, and I sort of became like the computer one of the computer specialist people, or, you know, I was doing that. And then I was like making signs and stuff. Like I sort of had like a sort of behind the counter, like behind the desk, like
I think
job
you
at
can just say you
Kinko's.
worked at Kinko's.
I worked at Kinko's. Yeah. I mean, I did that for like, that was a lot of it. And then, yeah, after school, after I graduated, I got a job doing, you know, like working at Target as like a freelance graphic designer, but I was on site and it was a full-time thing. And I did that for a while. I really didn't like, you know, I didn't like the environment, you know, like I didn't like how much of my time was spent in meetings with people talking about things that had really nothing to do. Like I'd rather just be at the desk designing things. And that was what I was good at. And that was like, you know, watching my art director get in arguments with like the legal department and like, you know, do all that kind of stuff, but like not at all what I wanted to be there for. So I mean, I ended up leaving that after a while, and I started working at an ad agency in Minneapolis that did a lot of, it was mostly Target work. And I think that was why they were really good at finding ex-Target people and kind of pulling them in. 'Cause like, you know, like they knew sort of the lay of the land or whatever. And I did that for a while, and it was good. I mean, it was, you know, those kind of jobs pay really well, but I think socially I didn't really fit into that situation. Like I don't know. I mean, there's it sort of going back to my childhood stuff or whatever. There's like I think there's like a grace that people move through those situations with that I don't always have, you know, and I just never felt, in both of those jobs, I didn't feel like I really belonged there. Like you know, at Target, the entire time I was there, I kept expecting the guy I worked for, who was like, I mean, he was a little bit of a tyrant. He was like feared in their design department, but like, I kept expecting him to just, you know, like one day I'd have a hand on my shoulder being like, dude, we figured you out. We actually made a mistake. You can go now. You know, and that was how I felt the whole time I was there. And the ad agency thing, it was sort of, you know, they were all wonderful people. You know, like the entire environment there was really great. But the entire time I just felt like I was gonna get that tap on my shoulder and be like, you don't really, like, we all know that you're not supposed to be here. You know.
So while you were doing that, like on the side, were you also like building up and ramping up your printing?
That was the thing, is it sort of, it was really convenient timing, because while I was doing all that, like we were making posters and like doing that stuff. And, you know, our friend Matt Zahn that we kind of started Landland with, he and I were sort of like materializing an idea for how to have a screen printing studio. We had spent a lot of time before that doing real makeshift, really like makeshift screen printing things, you know, in pretty much like any basement that would have us, like friends' houses and all this stuff, just trying to like make something work, but not really understanding how to do it. And also having like a fear of like real overhead, like renting a studio and you know, all the kind of like the scary parts of it that we were keeping at bay as long as we could. But, you know, while I was working at this job, I was spending all my after hours time making posters. And at a certain point I was like sort of taking time off from the job to like make some poster stuff happen. And then I dropped down to part-time, and then I dropped down to a thing where I reasonably could not be trusted with like actual jobs. You know what I mean? Like I was kind of doing, like I was putting together presentation decks, and I was kind of doing like anybody work, you know, and the writing was on the wall. Like I was shifting into full-time poster stuff. And at some point I kind of just like gracefully made an exit, and I hopefully they feel the same way. I don't know. I mean, I hope I was like useful to them, like for the time that I was there, but it just, this thing sort of became more, you know, like we were starting to get asked to do posters for like national bands and bigger jobs and like things that actually, you know, could pay for the studio that we were now renting and the equipment that we now needed to do larger volumes of things. And I don't know, it felt very natural to me that the Landland stuff kind of took over the other job.
And so you mentioned Matt Zahn, and so like Landland as it is today, I think officially started in 2007, which was a combination of the two of you plus Matt. So how did that begin? I mean, it was originally 2222, and then y'all were kind of doing your own thing. How did y'all decide to join forces and create what became Landland?
The 2222 thing, that's like a byproduct of me just not knowing how to name things. It was a very cumbersome name. It was like very, but Matt and I worked at Kinko's together, and then later on worked at Target together. Like we kind of like piggybacked jobs with each other, and we were very, very close. And the whole time that we were doing that stuff, like he was involved in bands in a scene in Minneapolis that was like completely foreign to me. It was like these weird space rock people that like I would go to these shows and it was like the other Minneapolis came out. You know what I mean? It was like really all of a sudden I didn't know anybody, and they were all like people that would like, to my eye, would like wear costumes to shows. It was like really like, it was very interesting. It was like very, very interesting. But, they all needed a bunch of stuff. Matt was designing a ton of stuff for all those bands, and like I was doing my circle of stuff, and like Jess was doing her circle of stuff, and like we kind of scrambled around and like tried to make it work in a few different places. And at some point, I think Jess was living elsewhere, California. And Matt and I were like fed up with the situation we were printing in. And it was like, we got to rent a place. If we're renting a place, it needs a name. Like, why don't we just shed this other thing that was like not really applicable anymore? And yeah, that we came up with Landland. And then Matt and I we were still in the process of like building out the studio and everything, and like getting our ducks in a row, and like talking about the kind of work we wanted to be doing, and sort of trying to like apply what we had learned at ad agency stuff about like, like you build a portfolio and you document your work this way and you do all this stuff, all these like, I think at one point the three of us were involved with like this other group that like, taught us that like buying a mailing list was like a really good way to like, just get clients. And, it was like this real, it was this thing that didn't feel natural to me and seemed like a strange kind of work that was like weirdly formal and not like the kind of like punk thing that we were all very, very inclined to be doing. And, but we got that studio up and running, and then pretty much like right when we were like ready to do the thing, Matt Zahn, he died of like a heart attack, in his sleep. And it was a weird thing where Jess was kind of on the periphery of the thing. Like we were going to pull her in to do illustration work when she could, and like when it made sense and all that stuff. And I think I was, this was 17 years ago. I was like ruined. You know what I mean? Like I did not know, I didn't want to keep doing stuff. I didn't want to, like it was extremely painful to go into this place and try to make work when like, all the 2x4s or whatever that we had like built this stuff with, like, had Matt's handwriting on them, and like all the boxes that, like we were storing supplies in and stuff, like had his notes all over him. I mean, it was like really difficult. There was a point where Jess and I were talking, and in my mind, like maybe it was different than this, but like in my mind, there was a point where she was just like, hey, should I come back? Like, do you want to do this? And she did, like she moved back, and like it sort of became like the thing that she and I were doing. And, I think there's a lot of psychology that could be applied to like my approach and my drive at that point in time. And like, like I would argue that for a big part of that, like getting us up off the ground was sort of, I had this thing of, like living in service to my friend who had this idea, who was not like with us anymore, and I don't know. I mean, it was a weird, rough time. And it's always sort of been like a testament to like Jess's like friendship to me. Like, I don't know.
I'm very loyal.
It's always been very important that like Jess kind of like made sort of, these sacrifices and stuff to like help this thing that we didn't even know what it was,
And you were in San Francisco at the time, Jess, right?
Yeah, again, just on a whim. I like moved out there for a while.
So maybe it wasn't that big a sacrifice,
No,
but it was meaningful to me.
Oh, no, it was. No, my friend had a kid and kind of needed some help. Just, it's a lot of work to have a kid. So I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I went out there. It was really fun to live in San Francisco for a while. But yeah, I was happy to come back. I had always worked in restaurants, and then I think I came back and I was working in a restaurant. I was like a barista again, and then I started cleaning houses, and I was a house cleaner for the first several years of Landland.
It was a while, yeah.
Which was great because it was a very flexible job. So I would go clean houses during the day, and then pull all-nighters at Landland, which could never do that now.
Well, and your job, it sort of did the same thing as like the course was similar, where it's like all of a sudden there was less house cleaning, and then I remember having the conversation of being like, hey, if I just quit this job, like what do we do? And yeah, I mean that's what ended up happening. But it was really nice for us to have these jobs that we could like rely on for the check while we get our sea legs, and then it sort of tapered off as it needed to. And, I mean, thankfully these people that we were working for were like really understanding. And, in both cases, I think they were very like arts minded, and I don't know, so many parts of doing this kind of job, it would be terrifying if you were just dropped into it. I don't know that a lot of people really have it happen that way. It's,
Well, and neither of us really had any kind of like safety net.
No, not at all.
So we couldn't, and I don't think either of us have ever been comfortable with taking out loans,
No, we're very,
maybe a little bit more now, but yeah, so there was no, there was no, we didn't find investors.
yeah.
But I mean, we had to really gradually get to the point where we felt comfortable supporting two people on what we could do through Landland.
And to that point, I think that our growth has been it's been very incremental at a pace that feels natural, where it's we slowly upgraded whatever our worst thing was, and built the studio out into a thing that functioned the way that we needed it to. And then once we got that kind of down, then it was time to maybe see if other people could help us. We had interns for a minute, and, sort of figured out that wasn't what we were built for. And then, we've had assistants in various capacities, and, we're very overhead averse, it's
Our first real studio was great too, because once we felt like we needed to expand, we could just knock down a wall and expand into the space next to us, which was really amazing. I mean, honestly, really amazing.
It was kind of nuts.
When we did that, we got our first tiny little window up by the ceiling.
Yeah, we didn't have to be moles anymore. It was,
we went a long time with no natural light.
Yeah.
It's incredible how each project kind of paid for the next upgrade or the next piece of equipment.
Yep.
Because I know for a while that y'all weren't equipped to do 24 by 36 posters, and now you are. Now you have a press that will do that.
That was, it was like that. It was that kind of thing. We went from hand pulling posters for the longest time, which caps you out at the quantity, right?
And the size.
And we, all of our early stuff is pretty small for a reason. It's just hard to pull an 18 by 24 poster. But yeah, it was, and then we stuck with that for a long time. And yeah, thankfully, I mean, once we moved back to Minnesota from Chicago, it just felt like time. It was like we had this press that was working just great for us, but we had friends that could sell us their hand-me-downs.
Shout out to Burlesque.
Yes,
always.
Yeah. And I mean, but we bought this press from them specifically so that we could print, these larger posters and. I do feel like that happened at a time that it needed to. I value the work that goes into printing these smaller ones. We can print an 18 by 24 poster. We can print it 2 up now, which helps us with the time that we're spending on this stuff. And it's helpful to not come into these advancements too prematurely. You know what I mean? I have respect for every step that we've taken. You know, like we bought a fancy, expensive exposure unit for the thing, but I appreciate that all the time because I know what it's like to build one from scraps that you get at like the reuse center, or like the, you know, like the recycling place. You know what I mean? Like I know what it's like to build this stuff from essentially garbage. And, you know, once you are in a spot where you can replace it with the thing that's built to do the job that you need it to, it
and does it really well and
it does it really well. And you just respect it. Like
Yeah.
I have so much respect for every piece of equipment in our studio.
And you're never not grateful for how
Yeah.
how well these things work when they're
Yeah, I mean,
when
because
they're like
I
professionally made.
you know, yeah.
And I think it's interesting that it sounds like all of the, you know, from the very beginning, it was always going to be both sides of the creation of the thing. Both the illustration and the printing were so tightly coupled from the very beginning that was never even a thought in your head that you would do one or the other. It was always like both. So tell me a bit about that. Like why were they so tightly joined from the very start?
We're both really controlling.
There's that. I mean,
We're
it's
both
interesting.
really picky. It's true.
Interesting. Well, and that's also when we started doing this stuff, that was sort of how it was. Like most of the poster makers all printed their own stuff. And then there was a shift where that was like a really not cool thing. And like everybody's like, oh, you know, that I remember having someone tell me like very, very bluntly that, you know, they were able to advance their illustration skills much, much faster than I would be able to because I wasted half my time printing. You know what I mean? And for me, I'm like, for me, it's a relief. You know what I mean? Like we can go from spending all this time drawing and all this time like making the thing, and then I get to like click that off and switch to a completely different headspace where, you know, we finish the workout in a production way, and it's like a completely different skill set, and it's completely different problem solving, and you're not doing the ideation anymore. You're just making sure that the thing looks as good as it can. And that's a lot of it. Is the whole time you're printing, you're making tons of decisions on the fly. Like it's never straightforward, and it's never without, you know, like whether that's mixing the ink colors or like, you know, deciding which like flaws in the process you're okay with, and like all this stuff. And we've sent a handful of things off to be screen printed, and I've never felt good about it. Like the thing comes back, and I've just never felt, you know, like the decisions that were made were the ones that I would make. And so we're pretty stubborn about that. Like we, you know, like I'm, you know, insistent now on we print our own stuff, and I've turned down work, you know, like, I mean, to my detriment, like I've turned down cartoonishly large jobs because I am uncomfortable with having someone else handle that part of it. And, you know, and we have, you know, there's a third Landland person now, like Rebecca, who is like, I mean, she's sort of like the everything studio person, you know, like she handles a lot of the things that I don't necessarily need to touch, but like lately that's included printing and, you know, just having someone I can like trust to handle that part of it.
And she's the only one of us who doesn't have severe ADHD.
Right. There's that too.
Which has been a revelation.
It's been, yeah, no, it's cool to have someone that sort of like can like check me, you know, and be like, we're staying focused today. You know, it's nice. But yeah, making sure that we're handling every step. I like to think that it's like an asset to the people that we work with because it's not changing hands a bunch of times. And like, but yeah, that's always been like really important, to the point where we've moved our studio a million times and never once have I entertained the thought that we wouldn't have a way to print stuff.
You mentioned decision making as part of like the printing process. How much does a piece like evolve during the printing of the thing? You know, do you ever make changes on the fly as you're printing?
It depends. I mean, in my mind, it's kind of a lot, you know, like there's a lot of like color balance issues and you know, a lot of like how the inks are interacting with each other and that kind of stuff. But I mean, then I think about like people like Son and Zimmer who like literally are seeing a thing come off the press and being like, you know, another 3 layers of art that we haven't, you know, like negotiated yet is what this needs. Like there are people that like actually will just keep designing the thing as it needs to be designed. Our stuff is like, before we go to print, we have like a JPEG that's been approved by the bands or whatever. And I think that there's some flexibility there, but for the most part, it's pretty dialed in. It's mostly just the troubleshooting and like, how to deal with variables as they come up. And, if we were making more art prints and stuff, which I definitely do want to do, I think there'd be more exploration, but like, because a lot of our stuff runs through this like approval filter, the decision has to kind of be locked down. At least in my mind. I don't know if these people are actually more flexible than I give them credit for, but I have no idea. We early on, we pulled some like moves on some people, and I think it scarred us a little bit, where we like changed the overall color scheme of a print because we felt like,
this was me. You can be honest about who this was, but this is me not ever having any experience in like the
I signed off on it.
world.
I was like,
I know, but probably because I was like convincing in my enthusiasm for just making major changes on the fly. But I really think like me just not having any real experience in like the professional world. Like I had to learn some of this stuff the hard way. Yeah, and probably still am.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, definitely. So like for most of the work that y'all have done throughout the career has been for bands and for gig, for concert posters. How do those projects usually come to you? Is there like a pipeline for that?
There is, in that, a lot of this work happens through merch companies that handle a lot of bands. And so if you do a project for one of them, and I think for the most part, they're getting in touch based on, stuff that we have on the internet or whatever, like our Instagrams or whatever. Or at least initially that was the case. But, if you deliver well for one of these bands, it sort of solves some of their problems if they can just run you through the rest of the bands on their roster, and so that's, there are a couple like kind of larger companies that we work for in that way. And it's nice because, neither of us are terribly like forward minded about like, like I'm not looking at like music trends and trying to figure out who the best hot new bands are or whatever. So like when those bands come to you, and they're like, hey, do you want to do a poster for, like whatever. It's helpful because then, we can research those bands and figure it out kind of retroactively, but I'm not having to like headhunt, you know what I mean? And that's a lot of it. Like there are people who work with these bands that we trust a lot to like put us on jobs that we make sense for. And, sometimes that match doesn't happen well, and that's frustrating, but like, that's a lot of it really, honestly, is, relationships that we already have over the years with a handful of people. And sometimes we'll reach out, like I'll reach out to bands. It doesn't happen much now, but like if there's a band I love or I'm like personally invested in, I've like reached out to them and been like, hey, like a lot of times it's bands that they're not poster minded, you know what I mean? So I'm like, hey, a poster would be great for this, this and this and that. And then I kind of have to like sell it a little bit, but and then ironically, like what ends up usually, like what used to happen a lot was that it would be a band I loved so much that I could not, I had no confidence that I could make the work. So then I would sort of like throw it in Jess's lap and be like, they called my bluff, like we need to make a poster. Will you please do this? And, and then she would make a poster, and it would be cool because, it'd be a thing that like happened by our collective hand, but like, it'd be a thing that I would not have anticipated. And, that happened a lot. I'm a lot more confident now than I used to be as far as that stuff is concerned.
That's
so,
funny.
Yeah, it's weird.
So Jess, when projects come in, how do you guys decide which of you is going to take the project?
This has changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, the one I don't want to speak for you, I guess.
No, go ahead. I actually feel like you would have a better answer on this.
A big thing about like how we're able to function is that the overarching theme, and this is going way back. I mean, this is going sort of starting at a level before the question you're asking, but like the overarching theme is that like, I mean, Jess and I are extremely close, and we're like like best friends. And in that way, we care about each other and want what's like best for the other person. And that's larger than the work. So we've, over the years, we've checked in, and like the answer to that question changes all the time. It changes according to capability and like capacity and interest. You know,
we have very different strengths too, I would say.
We do. Well, that dovetails a bit, but like it used to be a thing where the job would come in and we would look at the direction and be like, you know, they're asking for, you know, like birds doing stuff with plants, and that would be it would go down Jess's lane, right? Or, you know, like they're pointing towards this old Colin Malloy poster that I made of a, you know, that A-frame gas station that's closed down. And then it'd be a thing I knew that I needed to do. And that worked for a little while. And, you know, she and I both kind of like click out of modes where we feel inspired to like drive the projects, you know? So the division of labor changes all the time, I think.
We both also, you know, we get contacted as Landland, but we also get contacted as individuals.
Separately too, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of it is just like people coming to me directly.
Yeah, there's stuff that Jess does that I have no contact with, you know what I mean? And it's very interesting because, yeah, the thing will be done and I never even knew it existed. Or, you know, a lot of what we've been doing with band posters lately, is that I will sort of do the ideation. I'll draw the thing, and then Jess will handle like color duties and stuff because she's very fast and very good at it. You know, like it's a way of like getting the project done in a way that we're both satisfied with, where we're handling the parts that we're both kind of naturally inclined towards.
Have you ever been like, or have you ever had to turn down a project because, you know, either the band you didn't like, or maybe they didn't align with your values or principles, you know, things like that, where you've just completely like flat out rejected a project?
There's been some mismatches, you know, like there was a thing where we got asked to do a poster, and it was funny because like immediately with the brief, like we had a conversation. It was just like, this person just wants us to draw the person, like the artist's face. Right. And like, we could probably do that, you know, but it's not interesting really, but it's also not what we do. Like, it was clear that they got our name off of some list or something. And I think we fought that process for like a while, but then ended up kind of just being like, we're not really what you know, like, and in the end, the poster, you know, you always see these things come out. You like, you know, the thing has a purpose and a date and all that stuff. And like the thing that came out was a thing that we never would have made on our, you know, what they approved was something we never would have delivered. There's that kind of stuff. We've had to do some checks to like, you know, make sure that like we're, you know, with musicians that we're completely unaware of, like, you know, make sure that they're not like, you know, racist or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, there's definitely been like some kind of moments like that. I don't know that we've turned anything down. Well, yeah, I mean, years ago, there was a thing I got approached to do packaging for like Camel cigarettes. And that was like a weird thing. Oh, I had like a funny, like the dog almost caught the car like moment with that, where I was broke, you know, like it was like the summer after working at Target, and I was like, I'm going to see, yeah, I knew enough about like approvals with these like large corporations and stuff. I did the work up until the point where I could possibly get the thing approved, and I panicked. It was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. And I did the work. And then at the end, when it was like clear that I was like getting through the process, I had to sabotage it and like I had to like break the brand guidelines that they gave me, knowing that they wouldn't have any patience for that, you know?
Wait, were you trying to just get the kill fee or something?
I was essentially trying to, well, so the way that it worked is there were tiers up until, so there was like pencil sketches and they'd pay you, you know, X amount of money. And then you go from pencil sketches to like final line art, and then they pay you a chunk of money for that too. And then if you get through that, you get to do the color phase, like the rough color, and then they pay you a bigger, you know, like, you know, and you're at the point at that, you know, like all the amounts have like, you know, a bunch of zeros after whatever, commas, and you know, but if you get the color part done and you move on to the final art, you're like, you're getting too close, right? Like you're getting dangerously close to it. And I got through the color part, and they had wanted me to like work on the final thing, and I had to throw the hand grenade in the room and like kill the project. They, there were a lot of rules to it that I mean, there were a lot of rules to it that they can't actually do. And I was very young. This isn't a thing that I'd advise anyone doing, really. It was a necessity during the time that I did it, but I I sort of sabotaged the thing, and they killed it very unceremoniously, but they did have to pay for all the work up to that point. And, I don't lose sleep over it, because it's like, not only is there infinite money where that goes, but it's also terrible people, terrible product, terrible, everything. So
you mentioned earlier when we were talking about like the different, like how projects get assigned between the two of you, and how y'all have kind of different lanes at times with different strengths. So I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit of that, the different styles that you guys, kind of explore in your work. And Dan, with you, a lot of your stuff is focused on road signs and very unique and often abandoned architecture. Mm-hmm. So I kind of wonder, like, why has that become such a strong inspiration for you? I know since you were a kid, you were like obsessed with road signs. So like that, I get. And like the abandoned buildings, does that kind of go back to what you were sharing earlier with your childhood, breaking into abandoned buildings? Is that sort of the beginning of that?
I think it does. I mean, in a large way, like that. There were things about that were so formative, but also, I mean, when I travel, and I'm trying to drive around the country as much as I possibly can, and like especially like out in the Southwest, and like these places where there's like evidence, there's like, it's like a weird archaeological thing almost, to a point where there's like the evidence of these places that like gave it a try, and then aren't there anymore for whatever reason. And in the desert, it just sits there and rots, and they leave it because there's no real point to taking it down until it becomes like a hazard for somebody. But I don't know. I mean, I sort of just like listen to like a natural call of like what I'm attracted to looking at, and there are things that literally, I mean, Jess has seen this happen like a million times. There are things that literally I have to pull off the road to like go investigate. You know what I mean? Or like, these like mysterious billboards that have been manipulated in a way that like only happens over time. You know what I mean? Like between like scrambling and like the aging and like the just taking whatever, these things are made to deliver a message. So it's especially interesting when something has rendered them useless. You know what I mean? Like you see those scrambled ones where it's like a mishmash of chunks of other billboards for whatever reason. And, other ones that just, it's not valuable real estate anymore, but no one's going to come in with like a bulldozer and take it down. So it just sits. That stuff, it's always been what I've looked at. And it's, I mean, I feel very much like to like an almost embarrassing degree, I've had like a one-track mind when it comes to that kind of stuff. Like it's still signs. It's just like, it's the same stuff that like when I was a kid, I would make my family take pictures of me next to street signs. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing.
So is the evolution of purpose the main thing that kind of you're kind of grasping at, where it's, hey, this thing used to be one thing and now it has a completely different purpose than it was before? Or is it more about like, how did we get to this point where it's now abandoned and unraveling in this way?
There's something to that second thing. I mean, there's definitely something romantic about like trying to put a narrative on that stuff, where it's like, this diner that's out near nothing, you know what I mean? And some of that's like sort of like mourning the shift, like a lot of this stuff is like Route 66 stuff, right? Where it's like, this stuff used to be a pretty thriving thoroughfare. And then all of a sudden the interstates came through, and where that diner was, all of a sudden, a couple miles north of that, there's like, a Love's or a BP or, like whatever, a Denny's attached to, a Baskin Robbins, like there's this thing that is sort of less interesting about that than the history of like the back roads or whatever, I don't know. But I also don't look at these things in like a mournful way. I know when I'm looking at it and when I'm taking photos and when I'm drawing these things, there's, you never know if that's like long for the world or, like I like documenting these things because they'll be gone, like they'll just be, and I've seen it, like it bums me out. Like I'll pass through places I've passed through a million times. And it's like the thing that has become a landmark to me has been like razed to the ground. And for whatever reason, like there's plenty of good reasons, but like, yeah, I don't know. There's sort of this like reverence for these things. Like when they're gone, they're just gone. Like, like they it's almost like they never existed.
Yeah.
When, like how many times, like, you don't even probably notice it really, but like you're driving around and like, there's just a concrete slab on the ground out there in the middle of nowhere. And it's like, so yeah, I don't know. There's something nice about being able to like give these places like some like almost like a last moment of like respect or whatever,
So is it more about then documenting these things as sort of a reference of historical presence, or are you world building? Is this sort of like you're building a world of like post-human type of a situation?
Sometimes I think of it that way. Sometimes I do. Like, I mean, I'm trying hard. I have like a resistance to like over intellectualizing it, like sometimes it feels like that. I feel very much like it all these things connect. Like when you think about like, yeah, like the world of Landland or whatever, like I think it fits very squarely in like two camps, right? Like there's like all my decrepit stuff. And then there's all of like Jess's stuff that is like, I would argue probably like sort of more optimistic, but also, there's more life to it. And mine's sort of like the after the moment, like, yeah, I don't know. I used to think of it as more like a world building thing, but I think that term is different than I sometimes imagine it. I don't know.
And what about your work, Jess? Yours seems to also exist in kind of its own world that you've been constructing. Do you think of it that way also, or is it the individual piece the most important thing at any given time?
That's a good question. No, I definitely don't think about it in terms of world building. I feel like my interests are a little bit all over the place. Maybe it's because I'm probably a little bit insecure about not having had any kind of like formal education. More than anything, I feel like I'm always just trying to like learn through the process. And some of that is like technical learning. Like for a long time, I think I was really just fascinated by screen printing and like what was possible. How to make an image by building these layers of ink. So a lot of my early work, I was actually like more focused on that part. And like, that's what I was thinking about. And that was kind of like informing what the image was really. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really, it all feels like, I mean, I don't know if this is exactly the right term, but it feels like an exploration.
I mean, you have like a real like aversion to precedent. You know what I mean? Where it's like
myself.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you want to. A lot of your work, it's built to surprise, kind of. You know what I mean? Like where it's like it can't.
I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of through lines. I mean, I definitely get fixated on. There's a lot of like repeated, even like gestures, I guess. I get, a lot in a lot of my earlier work, I drew a lot of like human figures. And honestly, the only reason I moved away from that, I mean, I love depicting people, or like human type forms. And I love like expression through like a body. And I love trying to convey like motion, but also like emotion through like a human, using a human figure. But I think I kind of, because most of the work that I've done, most of my time has been spent doing work that's like for clients. There was a point where I like kind of learned that that's actually really tricky to like show people who aren't like supposed to be representing the people in like the band or whatever, which is part of why I was really drawn to doing like movie posters. And for a while I was doing some of those album covers because you could, there were enough people in these movies that you could like put them in there or have fun with that. But there was a point where I kind of figured out after I think I had a lot of stuff rejected from bands that like they don't want people in them unless it's like a very generic, like a, pleasant looking woman, which is like not what I'm interested in drawing. It's like
the white heterosexual couple in love showing the love.
Right. Yeah. Which is like the last thing I'm interested in. So I kind of moved away from that. I mean, I also, with art prints and stuff, I mean, I think it kind of became clear that, if people don't know like who the people are or why they're there, they don't really want to see it unless it's this kind of like avatar, like generic woman thing.
Is there like a story that you're trying to tell like through your work?
I mean, I think I am always like working towards a kind of like narrative, I guess. And that's why I do really like doing stuff for movies. I mean, I think because I like the challenge of trying to like distill a narrative into like one image. I think it's just really fun. And for whatever reason, my brain is really drawn to really kind of, I guess, cluttered, but like complicated images with just a lot of different elements, I guess.
Well, you're getting so much mileage out of that one image, right? I mean,
and that's what I really like figuring out to do. And that's like kind of when my brain is happiest, is when I'm trying to just kind of like compress a narrative into one image, which like the working for movie posters and then also like the album artwork is kind of perfect for that. Whereas with the band poster stuff, a lot of times I feel like they don't want a narrative, which makes sense to me. That totally makes sense to me. But that's part of why I've definitely moved away from doing the design part of the band posters. Now the color stuff that I do for Dan is like kind of a whole separate thing. And I love doing that. I love figuring out like what colors to make things. And I just love color in general, but it feels very separate from me, like, creating an image where I'm like making all the decisions. Yeah.
And for working on those, the movie posters or the album art where you're trying to compress a larger narrative down into a single image, how do you generally like approach ideation and like brainstorming what that composition is ultimately going to be?
Well, so I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but it was very interesting to me. So I think I mentioned before something about ADHD. Dan and I both like recently been diagnosed.
Can you tell?
Yeah, as having really, severe untreated ADHD. It's been a super interesting process. I've learned that sometimes I feel like I don't even have a personality. Like I'm just a walking list of ADHD symptoms. I'm like very textbook apparently. But one of the really interesting things that I learned early on in my ADHD journey was that one of the things that an ADHD brain struggles with is like hierarchy or like understanding which information is important. And so people with ADHD tend to like weight everything equally. And that's part of why if you have ADHD, you like ramble because you don't have any sense of what's the most important piece of information. You don't know what the other person needs to know out of whatever you're trying to convey. And so you just give them all of it. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that really explains a lot about how my brain works. But I thought it was really interesting in relation to how I draw, because I like all kinds of different art, I guess. I mean, I'm really into painting. Like that's like my favorite genre ever. But I mostly like two-dimensional stuff, I guess. But I like the types of painting or drawing or whatever 2D stuff that I appreciate. It's pretty all over the place. I like really complicated stuff. And I do like stuff that's like much more simplified, and especially with design, actually like graphic design, I'm really drawn towards stuff that's like much more simplified than I could ever create. And I've always been envious of people who can really like distill something into like a single image, or like, something like much more straightforward than I'm capable of. And I've always wished that I could do that. And I've never, it seems impossible to me. Like, I'm like, how do you know what's important? And so like, it was really interesting to realize that this is actually just maybe how my brain processes information. Both like the input of information and the output of information. It's just like, just a solid wall of, the details, I guess. It made me appreciate my work a lot better. It made me appreciate my brain more, I guess, to know that maybe I don't have any control over it. And it is maybe part of what makes my work like distinctive and unique, is that I don't know how to just like bring out the important parts, but hopefully that's fun for people to look at. I get why not everyone would be into it, but yeah. So like with the movie, just with making just one image for a movie, for me, it's like, how do I make one image for a movie? Like, I mean, of course it's like, okay, there's like the main character. You just make the main character, or like, I mean, you can watch a movie and see what like the iconic thing is going to be. But for me, I'm like, there's so much more to work with there. And like, why not try to pack it all in, That's why the album art was really fun, because you had like the front and the back and the inside. Now, the people I worked for probably didn't think it was so fun, how into that I was, because it would take me a lot longer than I think it takes anybody else. But it is what it is. It's how I work, I guess. But yeah, so I'll watch the movie. I'm usually like writing stuff down as I'm watching it. I usually watch it like once or twice, and just kind of like try to make note of like the images that just appeal to me, I guess. I mean, for better or worse, I'm really not capable of spending too much time with something that's not interesting to me in some way, and like, some of that has been just me figuring out how to make things interesting for myself. But, I really have to find things to like connect to and that I want to spend time with, if I'm going to spend time, translating them into a poster or whatever. But yeah, so it's really just about looking for stuff that jumps out at me, and then figuring out how to combine it in a way that I think is interesting.
Once you have kind of jotted those notes down and kind of landed on an image that you feel good about and wanted to spend time with, how do you take it to the next step and like develop the composition and refine it? Is it just a series of more and more refined drawings, or like, how do you go from there?
Honestly, I usually have like kind of a vision, like like if we're talking about a movie, like after watching the movie once, I usually it kind of just like comes to me fully formed. The notes are more about remembering like which specific elements I want to include, but like the overall image will usually kind of just appear in my brain. But then I have to like, concentrate on it really hard and figure out what all these like little details are, if that makes sense. But yeah, I honestly, the final thing is usually pretty similar to this, like the first sketch I make, but much more refined.
When does, I guess, color come into play in that process? Do you do color studies throughout, or do you have in that image that you're blessed with just appearing in your head? Is that already colored, and do you already kind of know what direction you want to go with that, or does that come more towards the end?
So I guess it kind of depends on what it is, but like with the movies, I think I am usually thinking about the color in the movie. Like a lot of movies will have like kind of a color palette, that like jumps out at you. So if it's something for a movie, I do try to kind of like think about the color in the movie. Or if there's any like a lot of directors will have like a dominant color that they're, or like a kind of like a color scheme. So like I'm usually doing posters for whatever reason. I usually get hired to do posters for movies that are older, like 80s or older. And I feel like a lot of the movies I've worked on, there's just like a palette that like makes sense to me. But yeah, I don't think about the color too hard. I mean, I probably should think about it harder. But
I think you also approach it. I mean, just the point where I see it is usually where all the layers are all called out and stuff. There's usually a big part of what dictates it is sort of trying to figure out like kind of inventive ways of having all these colors interact with each other. Because it's with screen printing, there's like the palette is limiting in a way. I mean, you can have like 14 colors, like you can do whatever, but like I think in order to Jess does a really good thing when she's building a file, or like a print where the color all sort of, she gets the most out of, like the colors that she's like chosen for the thing. So there's a lot of like, I think a lot of decisions in that too, like not necessarily like which colors, but just how they play off of each other and like, making sure that they are balanced enough or that like some are, focal points or.
And I think you've talked to me in the past just at just conventions about how you like the idea of getting new colors out of some colors. And you said that earlier, that when you saw that print on your family's house, you were amazed by the fact that you combine two colors and you get another color. Mm-hmm. So, which that immediately stuck out to me because of the conversations that we've had before about funny. Like creating new colors and just how that was something that you observed even as a kid. So yeah, I mean, like that resonated a lot with what Dan just said as well. I guess Dan, for you, with your like your concept process when you have a project and you're trying to build out a concept, is it a matter of like bringing up a lot of these references that you've built up over time with all the road trips that you've taken and kind of figuring out which ones match the band, or like how do you generally approach that?
Yeah, it sort of depends, because I mean a lot of times I'll kind of like I'll think about, I mean, sort of honestly, like the text and the typography and that kind of stuff and like how to place it into these environments. And then it's sort of just mixing and matching, like, like what kind of like, what kind of reference photography I have that like matches up with like the vibe that I want to have for the poster, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it depends. There's sometimes it's just a scramble. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's very difficult to like try to make sense of like, what fits with what. But a lot of times it is kind of based around like, how can I insert the messaging in a way that feels integrated with which scene, and, I don't know. And sometimes I feel like I'm bratty in that, like, I just really want to make a certain image, you know what I mean? And like, if there's not any barriers to that, like, if nobody that needs to approve it has any thing to say to like kill it, you know what I mean? Like, that is the thing that I want to make. And if they do, I switch gears and save, I sort of like bank it for later or whatever. But
how far do you have to go in that concept before you have to hit that approval wall of, hey, I want to go further? Like, do you have to get it really refined, spend a lot of time on it, or is it pretty rough? Like, how does that?
It's funny because I see, like with my other friends that make posters and stuff, like I kind of see the different stages of like their work, like what a rough art sketch would be like. We do pencil sketches and send them off to the bands, and they, usually it's just like a proof of concept where it can honestly just be like, here's a little chicken scratch thing of like a rocking horse or whatever, like, and sort of roughly how the design part will work or whatever. I think early on it was a product of like insecurity, but like I have gotten to a thing where like the sketch that I send them, usually the first time they see anything, it's like almost a blueprint for what the actual poster is going to be like, and some of that too is utilitarian. Like a lot of times I will take that sketch and I'll just send it over to Jess and she will use it as her roadmap to kind of work on the color while I'm working on the final drawing. So it has to line up pretty well. But yeah, a lot of times I'm sending like a really refined thing because I want to give the best argument that I can for why this thing should be the thing. And I don't, some people will send like, 4 or 5 different directions. If I feel called to do that, I'll do that, but it's rare. Like oftentimes I'm just like, you've trusted me to do a job. This is the job that I do. Here's what I've got for you. Like, how do you feel? And, it's not always a hole in one, you know what I mean? Like, but when it is, I think that everybody kind of has the understanding that like, I'll be making the thing that I most want to make. And there's trust in my judgment for that, and the further you get from that, like, if you have to keep taking stabs at it or whatever, it's like less and less exciting every time. And hopefully people that we're working for understand that. But yeah, the pencil sketches are pretty true to the thing. I also want to like prove to myself that if I'm going to finish the thing that I understand, like with the buildings and things like that I understand how the perspective works and I understand, all of that kind of stuff.
So at the point where it's approved and you get to move into the final drawing, is everything pretty? I mean, it sounds like everything's pretty locked down, figured out. You've already sent it over to Jess to start working on coloring a lot of times. Does it ever stray too much further from that pencil? Sometimes.
If Jess is on it, it doesn't really, like I don't want to like throw weird surprises. There's sort of a scale, I guess. Like, sometimes what ends up being sent over to her is I've got a lot more ideation stuff to do. And I just know that I'll be building my additions on top of whatever she's kind of done. Yeah, I don't know if it's from like situations in the past or whatever. I don't really like surprising bands with stuff like beyond that initial thing. Like I don't want to get, because the final drawing part is so laborious and there's so much that goes into it. I don't want to get to that place and have them be like, man, this has nothing to do with what we imagined it. You know what I mean? Like I don't want it to be, especially in situations where the typography is built into it and there's like stuff that, there's sort of like a point of no return with it. I want to just do the thing I've promised to do. And ideally it just looks better and more finished in the end. And, they're like, yeah, this is where we thought it would go. And
awesome. So switching gears a little bit, and before we talk about what you have coming up, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your growing and ever increasing record label. Yeah. So like in addition to, the poster work that you guys do, you have your own record label, which I believe was originally called Landland is not a record label. Yes. And now has a seemingly more formal name of Landland Coal Portage. So like, tell me about that. How did you get into making records?
And that original thing was like very much, it's further proof of my inability to like not to like gracefully name something. Like of course it needed to be clumsy and it needed to be hard to understand. The point to that originally was I wanted to put out records. That whole process, the whole behind the scenes process is really fun for me. Like, especially now that I have relationships with pressing plants and places that do these things well. I wanted to be able to put out records, but I'm not pretending to be like, like Sub Pop or, like Merge or, like I'm not pretending to be like a record label. There's a whole, especially back then, there was like a whole category of record label work that I was not interested in doing at all and could not promise a band. So I sort of named it that to kind of keep it in the like, hey, let's do a project together. Instead of like, let's do an album that has like an album cycle and a push and like, like all this stuff. It was sort of like me tempering expectations and being like, I can make a thing. Like I will make an object that looks and feels and sounds great, but also then you get the stack of them and
that's it.
It's sort of up to you to like, yeah, exactly. And that's changed a little bit. Like we started working with this band Slow Mass that like kind of trusted me to like for us to like learn how to do some of these things together, you know, and it helped having a band be really proactive in that. And, you know, there was sort of this like grace given to me to like sort of figure out how press stuff works. And like, you know, there's a whole machine behind that is not attractive to me, but I understand it's like part of, you know, the deal now. So it's sort of, you know, it's an ongoing learning thing, but, yeah, it's fun. It's really rewarding to me to be able to like have this kind of hand in a band's progression and like have, you know, be able to like plant a flag in like a chunk of a band's discography and be like, this record, especially some of these records would not exist if I didn't jump in and be like, hey, let's do this thing, you know, to have that thing exist when it wouldn't have otherwise is like a pretty cool thing. It goes beyond like making a poster for a band or like doing these like weird merch projects that like sort of have less weight, you know. I mean, not to devalue what most of what we do, but like there's a really cool thing about like making a record happen, you know, and like
it's a permanent part of their discography. I mean,
yeah, no, 100%. I mean, and in that way that like album art, like when we design album art, it becomes a permanent part of like like the discography. It's like the, you know, like this relatively limited visual vocabulary that a band has, and to like actually do the whole thing and like have the record exist in that way is, it's really fun. It's, you know, like the bands that have trusted me with their recordings to do that stuff, I'm so grateful for, because it does scratch like an itch that a lot of this other stuff kind of doesn't as much, you know.
And so with the shifting of names, does that represent like you're taking this that much more seriously now, or
a little bit? Yeah. I mean, it solves some confusion, but I mean, I didn't do myself favors by picking a word that effectively doesn't exist anymore. You know, it's a very like old term for, you know, and I was living in a house like way back that was like around the corner from a Lutheran bookstore that had that in the name. It was like, you know, like, I believe it was like Lutheran Colportage Services. And I just became like obsessed with this word that it's effectively like a peddler of like religious tracts, and like they travel and like sort of like spread the word, whatever that word might be. There was something that was really nice about that, and the fact that it's like hard to Google it. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of like an SEO solution, right? But yeah, it's sort of like formalizing it in a way. Also, I just got sick of explaining the other thing, and
I mean, Landland is a record label now, so
yeah, it is a record. Yeah, there are people that primarily know that we put out records, and it's incidental that we do all these posters, you know, which is a strange like thing to me, because, you know, and it's interesting because there's not, I sometimes get really grumpy about the lack of crossover there, you know, like the people that buy our posters are largely not the ones that buy our records. There are a handful, and I'm so grateful for that, you know, like almost to a degree that is like, if I told these people how, like what it means to me when I see like, you know, these people that buy our Fish posters that also buy the records when their name shows up in the mail order, I'm just like giddy about it. You know what I mean? It means that the work is like what is attractive and not just the name that's on the poster. But it's, you know, at this point it's rare, and there's people that only care about the records, and, you know, I've had to explain where the money to make the records comes from.
It's interesting how something that I've heard you describe in the past as a very expensive hobby has now become such a prominent part of your practice. What about like the business side of it? Like, how does the business side of record production and publishing differ from what you had, you know, all experienced with the screen printing?
I mean, frankly, it's more money out than money in. So it sort of is still an expensive hobby. There are a few records that we've made that paid for themselves immediately and then helped pay for other ones to come out, you know, and that's cool, but it's not really what I count. Like everyone that we've released records for have been friends in some capacity. And I'm, for better or worse, I'm on this quest to like make things happen if I can. If I have the resources or the know-how or whatever to make a thing happen that might not otherwise, I'm probably going to try to make the thing happen. Not in like an indiscriminate way, but like, yeah, I mean the catalog of records, it's nice to put them out. It's like a resource for these bands to like sell them and do the things and get their name out there and stuff. But it's hard to have a record label right now, especially like a really small, a really small one. If we didn't have the screen printing and the posters and all that stuff sort of subsidizing the records, it would be a lot more difficult to do that, which I'm fine with. You know what I mean? Like it is an expensive hobby. It's, I love it when it works out, but also I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of too stubborn to not do it. I mean, right now we have like a weird backlog of things that need to get released, but have been hung up for various reasons. And yeah, I don't know.
Right on. Well, I mean, that's a good segue. What have y'all been focused on lately, and what does 2025 look like for you?
We've been printing a lot of other people's stuff. I think for a lot of reasons, I kind of got a little burnt out from posters. If I'm being really honest, like making band posters, there's a lot. The temperature or like the climate of doing that kind of work has sort of shifted in a way that I don't like. I'm trying to be like really diplomatic here, but like there are things about it that have kind of gotten away from the things that have been attractive about it for this whole time. And I think for me, that just means I need to take a beat and like try to do something else that's adjacent to it for a while. And the most practical thing that translates to for me is we're handling a lot more printing of other people's stuff than we used to. It's interesting because it's a little more behind the scenes, but it feels really rewarding in a way where I'm like improving a skill set and like confronting a lot of insecurities I have about printing and, having to like sort of roll with the punches of the way that other people set up files and the colors they choose and like all these things, it completely takes me out of my safe zone for, like any kind of crutch that I've got as far as printing, because, these people are throwing variables at me that I'm completely unfamiliar with, and that's been really interesting. It's also like, frankly, it also pays better than making our own posters, like it just does. And
it's been an expensive few years.
It's been an expensive few years. I mean, we had a brutal studio move. Yeah, it's been weird. It's been weird. There's been a lot of stuff that we've had to kind of like pay for and cover, like we just built a studio actually out of scratch. You know what I mean? Like we took a shell of a garage and converted it into an actual screen printing studio that I think functions really, really well.
It's great. You did a
great
job.
With its own elevator too. I mean, like, come on.
It's got a little elevator. I mean, we were
just for paper.
It's yeah. I mean, it was a thing. Like it was time to buy a place. It was time to like really get out of renting these like weird, totally impermanent like warehouse spaces and things like that, and not let somebody dictate, how we existed in a space anymore. The last move was brutal. I mean, we've been stuck in this weird pattern where every 3 or 4 years or whatever, we've had to completely do like a total upheaval of our studio space and move it into a new room. And that means, there's, a few months of like, either very reduced work or like not being able to work at all and like no income, like there's just been these like, our whole time existing as Landland has been punctuated by these like pretty brutal studio moves, like whether it was like moving from Minneapolis to Chicago, which was like a lot of work, and then moving, like in Chicago, we had to move on not a lot of notice, like into another room in this building. And like, then we moved from Chicago back to Minneapolis. And like this last situation that we were in, all of our equipment was effectively like built into the space that we were in. They changed a freight elevator into a passenger elevator, and the capacity was not enough for our equipment to like leave the room we were in. So we had to learn how to take all of our equipment apart, like completely apart, to make it small enough to fit out of the building, and then reassemble it. And Jess's dad and brother were like super instrumental in helping us with that. But it was just more proof that like we just needed to be in a place. Like, I mean, I've always wondered if we can actually be somewhere long enough to stabilize and like get our heads above water, if we can actually like sort of make this into the job that we want it to be, and like work in a way that's not stressed out about recovering from a move or getting ready for one, or like, and actually, this whole time we've been like sculpting it to be the thing that we want it to be, but we've hit these roadblocks, and like what happens if we don't have the roadblocks? And this spot that we're in now feels the most stable it just feels more stable than any of the other ones. And yeah, being able to like go into a place and build it out because you own it is a way, way crazier feeling than like these places where like you build everything with the understanding that someday you'll have to take it apart, And I'm still stuck in that mentality. Like we kind of did that this time, but like it felt more like we could like bake the place in and like really get it to be exactly the thing that we wanted, and make some decisions that were like a little destructive to the original setup to like make our version of it work better.
Yeah. It sounds like it's the first time since, y'all were working out of your own basements that you're not subject to the whims of a landlord.
Yeah. Yeah. Which matters a lot. I mean, like our last place.
They have a lot of whims.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing, is like with the last place, as soon as they realized, it changed ownership, and like as soon as the new owners realized that we were trapped, you know what I mean? Like we were built into the place. Then all of a sudden it was like really important to like triple the rent. And it's like that's the kind of thing that would always happen. And in Chicago, it was like, the building got bought, and the whole building, which I can't even be mad about it, but like the whole building got turned into like the headquarters for like a homeless outreach place. So it was like a bummer because they were kicking us out, but it was like, well,
it's for a good cause.
I would argue that the building does a better thing now than it did when we were, having shows in there and like raising hell or whatever. So yeah, but no, it's been a lot of work getting up and running, and like, I was really nervous about doing this stuff in a residential area, and it just with like neighbors and noise and, all that stuff. But it's been as smooth as I think it could be. But yeah, a lot of it's focused on us printing other people's stuff. Like we're, and we're not like in the yellow pages, you know what I mean? Like it's a really tight group of friends that I know trust me, and I trust them, and,
Any big projects or festivals or conventions that you're looking forward to in the next coming months?
I don't know if this will be out in time or whatever, but like I'm on the way right now to the 100th flat stock in Las Vegas. And then Jess will be coming out, and Rebecca. Actually, it's weird. It'll be like one of the rare times that all three of us are in the same room. But yeah, Jess and Rebecca and I will be it's part of Designer Con.
Nice.
And I set out on this trip that I'm on right now. Everything's in the car and ready to go. I'll leave Oklahoma City later today, and I'll end up there, and then we'll set up a booth and hopefully sell things to people and talk a lot. And I don't know. I mean, I think we're, as far as like beyond that, like next year's stuff, we've got some stuff that we need to like zero out, some work that we owe people, and that needs to happen. And then I think it's like sort of blank slate as far as like, we'll do some band posters if the band posters are exciting to us. And then I want to make more art prints. I think that both of us would feel a lot better if we were doing more of that. We used to make work that I thought was like more fun, like self-initiated, like goofy stuff. And with all this like turbulence, I think we got away from that a little bit. And I want to focus on that kind of stuff a little bit more.
A lot more for me.
A lot more. Yeah. No, I think, it's most of what we talk about. And then there's also like, I've got ideas that it's probably time to start like talking about like trying to put together like a book of some sort, like with all these studio moves, we end up like looking at like all the archived stuff and everything. And it would be selfishly, it'd be really nice to have like a place where we could see it all in one spot, like all the old stuff that we've made. And I think people would be excited about that, but it's also a daunting task. I mean, maybe that overlaps with this thing where we're printing other people's stuff. So I actually have the mental capacity to like think about it, but.
So, and then that sort of a project, do you imagine that you'd be doing all of the layouts, all of the copy, all of that?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I don't think I would want to do the layout stuff. I would be into establishing like a basic template for it, but like I'm not delusional enough to think that I understand book design in a way where I could do it and have it be a good job. I'd want someone that actually knows about how that stuff works. And I think that I would have a heavy hand in it because I am also fussy, but like I would want to trust the people that are good at those parts to do the parts that they're good at. That's a thing that I've learned a lot over the years, is that like, I cannot actually handle every single thing myself, and that as much as I stubbornly wanted to, everything works out better if you just trust some other people to do the thing that they're good at. And I think for the writing part of it, like I've always been attracted to those like the oral history type things where you get a bunch of the people that were around for the thing, and you kind of have them all kind of go through their parts of it. And then like somebody smarter than me compiles all of that into a running narrative, but it's all firsthand accounts from like the people that were important to the story. I think that would be better than what I see happen a lot, where somebody tries to like write it, and I don't know.
It's a cool idea. It's very like punk. It's very like DIY.
I think so. And then it's not us shaping the narrative, which is the last thing that I want. You know what I mean? Like, then it's sort of built more accurately by like the people that saw it, from the outside or whatever. It's funny because like if Jess and I sat down and tried to write the history of it, what ended up happening would 100% depend on the mood we were in that day. You know what I mean? Like it just would. And I think that we're not the most reliable narrators for a lot of this stuff.
What about you, Jess? Any big projects, poster projects coming up, or anything else that you're working on that you're excited about?
Well, I'm finishing a private commission that I've been working on for like years for the movie The Night of the Hunter. That's like one of my all-time favorite movies, so it's been a weirdly intimidating project, but I'm excited about it to finally exist in the world. I actually really enjoy these private commission poster groups, although I need to get a little bit faster at doing them. But it's actually kind of a really fun way to work for me, and everybody's been so great in these groups. But honestly, like, I mean, I also just got really burnt out a few years ago and like hit this wall. And I think some of it had to do with just being really bored with like band poster stuff. Again, I love doing color for other people, but it like the design of band posters I just like stopped being able to do it anymore. Dan kind of witnessed this happen. It just I just couldn't do it. And because I've always worked with like a client in mind, there's never really a time where I thought of myself as like an artist without a client, without like the objective being to like make some other person or band or whatever happy. It's only been in the last few years where I'm like, wait, am I an artist? Like, maybe I am an artist. What does that mean? Like, who am I as an artist? Like, who am I if I'm thinking about making work that doesn't have to do with like either a client or like trying, like the main focus being able to like being to sell it to some
or piggybacking off of somebody
unforeseen group of people.
Story.
Yeah, I mean, I've done plenty of things that I feel like are for me before they're for anyone else, but I've never like thought about myself in those terms, like artist. And part of this might be not having really gone to school and like developed a practice outside of like work, but these last couple of years where I've been really burnt out, and then I think the other thing is just really like this lifelong untreated ADHD kind of catching up to me. I've been really like fighting my brain the last few years in a way that's just made it really hard for me to finish anything. Like I've always had these perfectionist tendencies that have slowed me down, made me like start things over a lot. And I think it's been balanced by that, like ultimately like the work is probably better for it, but something's gotten out of whack in the last couple of years where like I just can't finish anything because I'm so ruled by this kind of like perfectionism. And I'm sure to the outside world my stuff doesn't look perfect, but I have this idea of what I want it to be like, and I can just like never get there, and it's always moving inside my own head, like the goalpost is always moving. But anyway, so like the last year, like starting to actually actively treat my ADHD, I do feel like I'm fighting my brain a little bit less and like kind of able to like tap into my creativity that isn't like attached to there being a deadline, if that makes sense. So I'm just like, I really feel like I'm in a moment of like figuring out like who I am as an artist and like what kind of art I want to be putting out into the world. And I've been doing a lot of that. It's been hard for me to do that in public, if that makes sense. So like, I mean, I've been in my studio basically all the time. Yeah, I mean, and some of it is trying to finish the stuff that like I started when I was in a worse place mentally, and like I'm having a hard time finishing it. But also I've been learning how to work in a way that isn't like tied to a deadline or tied to someone else's expectations of me, which has actually been really hard to figure out how to do. But so I'm excited. I'm looking forward to I feel like the dam is breaking, and like I have things in me that I want to make. It's just like, it's just been a really weird, like, it's not quite a fallow period because I have been like working and kind of trying to get to know my artistic brain better, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that's amazing. And it sounds like you've been building up, you've been kind of exploring and figuring out what your voice actually is.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm trying to, I need to maybe become more public about it too soon. But, I mean, the other thing is like, I've always, the main focus has always been like drawing and screen printing. And, you have to, I mean, you don't have to, but a screen print requires like a particular type of drawing, to be made into a screen print. And I've actually, like, separate from all that, I've had a lot of like issues with like my body that have made it harder for me to actually draw like with a pen. And I don't know if it's carpal tunnel or what, but like I actually can't draw the way that I used to for long enough to like complete drawings. But I've also become more interested in painting in general. And so I've been basically like teaching myself how to paint the last few years, like kind of on the side. I mean, some of that I've used to like do color for stuff for people, like some of that is painted. And then I've been doing like commissioned pet portraits that I've been painting. But so some of it has been actually like developing these new skill sets that I can use to make things that can be reproduced without like doing as much damage to my body, which the way that I drew it just was like where, I'm just like my body's getting old or something, and the repetitive motions.
Well, and that's also from like the production standpoint. I mean, we started doing like CMYK printing essentially to utilize like Jess's like interest in painting, like doing like full color work, and that was years and years and years ago. And like, I think we've finally, that entire process has been like just learning from mistakes and like honing the skills and stuff. And I think within the last few years, we've sort of had like a breakthrough where I feel very comfortable that we could fully print like a painting that doesn't have like it doesn't have the cheat sheet of being able to lay like a sharp line work on top of it, to like hide any kind of imperfections or whatever. So it's, we've sort of been at the same time that Jess has been like honing the painting skills, we've sort of been like getting better and better at printing them too. So that like we actually can do like a full color like painting as a screen print, and and that's the thing that like we've always talked about what could happen if we start releasing more art prints and like less band stuff, and like it's happened in like little bits, but it's largely uncharted territory, and it's scary because I don't know with certainty that people will buy art prints if we put them out, you know what I mean, for all sorts of reasons, but like we just don't know. And I think it'll be I think it feels like it's like kind of time to start like figuring that out and like trying to like just make an argument for like what happens if you if we put something out that doesn't have a band name you like on it, or it doesn't like piggyback off of the the Simpsons, or like whatever, you know what I mean, like not to be disparaging to like those art forms or whatever, but like what happens if it's just a thing that's self-initiated? Like, will people be interested enough in it to like, for us to like actually sort of sustain that kind of work too? I don't really know.
And is it possible, I guess, to kind of ramp up in the same way that you did originally with Landland, where you were working another job while you were slowly increasing the work that you did for bands? Similarly, you could do printing and all the stuff you're doing today and slowly decrease that and increase the other, like gradually.
That's basically what we've been.
Yeah. It's like if we focus on printing like stuff for our friends, which is awesome, it sort of does, save the brain space to make, to like test the waters with some art prints. And like, we could put some out and they could totally bomb, but that's fine because the income from the other stuff is there. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's in my mind too, like a big part of what working those jobs and trying to do posters, like the part of it that was like difficult to do both was that like all day long you use the tools for one thing to like have to pivot and then use those same tools for like a completely different purpose. Even though it's more exciting and more rewarding, it's like you've just been hacked on all day by, like the kind of the less rewarding part of the process. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're printing, it's an easier pivot to go, you'd be like, I just want to spend the night drawing a thing. You know what I mean? And there's not enough crossover there to like feel exhausted. Like it is that thing I was talking about earlier where it's like your brain clicks off from this kind of thinking and clicks into a different kind of thinking. And
also just actually using your body in a different way.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Tell people where they can find you online so they can follow all these new things you got going on.
I mean, we're in desperate need of an overhaul on the website, but our, like the landlandcoalportage.com is the store site that I think has most of the work, but I feel like I'm more present on Instagram than anything. And that's just Landland Coal Portage on Instagram. Yeah. And Jess is _ J Siemens on there, but also, yeah, like, I don't know, the records are on our band. We have a Bandcamp and like all the record stuff is there, and
they can find all that through the website and your Instagram.
Yeah. The website will have all that stuff.
And you have like a Substack now too, that you're like writing a lot of stuff on.
Yeah. The goal is for that to be a better resource. Really. I switched the mailing list. We have a very healthy mailing list, that was run through MailChimp, and it got very expensive just based on the number of people that were on it. It was, as we weren't sending, there'd be months where we didn't send any emails out at all about anything. And, we're still paying like this sort of freakish amount of money for it. So I was looking for alternatives, and Substack kind of emerged at the same time as being like almost like a blog type thing. It's a very interesting platform that I think we will be able to shape into being a better way to communicate with people that are interested in our work. I want it to be more casual or more informative than just blasting out when we have stuff for sale. Like I think that there's a lot of context to what we're doing that isn't always apparent, that it'd be nice to do that and have it be a good resource, especially because the archive of it exists forever. It's not like emails that are just popping in and then get deleted or whatever. There's sort of like you can have a running narrative on there. We're still trying to figure that out. It's not my nature. Like I have to be in like a really specific headspace to do that kind of writing. But when it's happening, it feels great. I just need to be able to tap into it more.
You're a natural.
I mean, sometimes like, you know, I mean, I've done a lot of work to try to like figure out how I want to write and how I want to communicate. It's so based on how I feel at the moment that, you know, like it's almost like a kind of extroversion for me, you know, like I can tap into it, but it's not always
drains
there.
The battery.
It drains the battery a little bit. And, you know, and Jess and I, like, we talk a lot about like what we want that thing to be, you know, like I would just like to communicate more, you know, than just the, you know, what the mailing list has kind of been, where it's like, you know, like we've got these posters, you know, buy them or don't, you know. I don't know. I would like to think we're more interesting than that.
Awesome. So last question, and this is something I like to ask everybody, and I want to hear from both of you on this. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Should I go first? Well, I would love, and I'm sorry if you've already interviewed one of these people and I missed it, but you haven't. I don't think you've done an interview with Michelle Morin, have you? Morin?
No.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to hear an interview with her, or also Julie Avasar. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Are you familiar with her work?
No, I haven't. No, you'll have to send me a link to like their social media.
Okay, yeah, I'll totally send you a link to both of them. But yeah, I'd be really interested to hear a conversation with either of those people.
My thoughts, like immediately, I was thinking about like in the world of gig posters stuff or whatever. Like, I think Dave Klock would be a really fun person to hear. He's very conversational in a way that is. I think he can talk about this stuff in a way that is just more fun. The other person, I don't know.
No, totally.
He's a good dude, and he's a person that Jess and I are in touch with daily. So it's like,
nice.
I would like to see his brain documented for posterity more often than it is. I've always been curious to hear more about the Phil Elverum, who does the Mount Erie and the microphones and stuff. His visual work is a thing that it's so deliberate and in perfectly matching the rest of the art that he makes. And he's like one of my favorite designers, even though I don't think that he would ever consider himself that. He does so much with like a pretty limited set of resources, and it just, everything looks perfect. And I don't think I've ever seen him talk about the visual end of things. I mean, he's talked about the music to no end, but like, I think an interview that just focused on how, you know, his image making and, you know, like where he's pulling that stuff. I mean, it's pretty clear where he's pulling stuff from, but like just sort of his like design philosophies. I think that'd be pretty interesting, but I also realize it's just white dudes. I don't know.
What?
Awesome. Well, great choices. But Dan and Jess, thank you so much for doing this special episode with me. It's been really great to catch up with you guys. It's been far too long.
Yeah. Likewise.
Happy
it's good to see
5-year
your
anniversary
face.
too.
Thank you.
Congratulations on that.
And thanks for putting your energy into, you know, putting something like this into the world.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's cool. I think it's a super good thing. And thanks for asking us to be on it.
Of course. So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dan and Jess. It's interesting to reflect on how they built up the Landland operation piece by piece and brick by brick, with each project effectively funding new additions to the practice, some new piece of equipment or an upgrade to the studio. You know, the state of their business today and the year 2024 is this accumulation of all of those bricks cobbled together all of these years. It was also really interesting to hear about how each of them had tried to effectively recreate the idea of screen printing, each in their own way, before learning about actual screen printing methods. Jess with her cutout pieces of paper acting as a template that she ran the paint over, and Dan with this multicolor copier constructing images out of multiple overlapping colors. Each approached it in a different way, but they were all trying for that same end. And then when Jess later learned about actual screen printing methods in school, it was like this aha moment. This is what I've been wanting to do. It just seems like more and more these two were destined to have their lives intertwined in this way. They crossed paths a couple of times by pure chance before meeting one more time in a way that really stuck. So thanks again to Dan and Jess for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. You can always get in touch with me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairespodcast. And lastly, before we wrap up, at the beginning of the show I mentioned that I'd have some more to say about the current and future state of the podcast. In addition to this being an extra long and extra special 5-year anniversary episode, this is also going to be the last episode, at least for now. This is a really tough decision for me to make since I really love making the show. I feel like I've learned so much, and having the chance to intersect with the lives of so many immensely creative, really talented, and thoroughly interesting people has been a real gift to me. But the truth of the matter is that I am no spring chicken, and the gray hairs in my beard can attest to that fact. And there's so much that I want to do while I'm still young enough and the world is still whole enough to do it. I'd love to visit more parts of the world and experience different cultures. I'd love to see more art exhibitions in different parts of the country in person and attend more openings. I'd love to do more local community organizing and activism. And if this last election has shown us anything, there is a lot of work that we need to do in the coming years, and especially with those people around us. And I know that I won't make time to do those things as long as there's an easy out in my back pocket. Oh man, I gotta edit this audio or do research on the next episode's guests. And that's just my nature, to turn to anything to get out of social situations. It's easy for me to go full hermit mode when I have something like this to keep me busy. The truth is that this show takes a long time to make. And in the very early days, I had dreams of it becoming big enough to where I could bring in more people to help with it, have another person to do the editing and the production, and taking some of that burden off my shoulders. But as we see, 5 years into it, that hasn't been the case. I'm still the only person making this show what it is, and it takes a lot of time. This is literally like having a full-time job, a second full-time job, and one that I actually pay to do. I get a little bit in from the amazing folks helping out at Patreon, but it isn't even enough to cover all of the bills. This has been entirely a passion project, and one that I feel extremely fortunate that people also have taken pleasure in. So thank you again. I always say at the end of the show, thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. I do truly appreciate every one of you that have listened to the show over the years. So yeah, this might be it. I don't know. I don't really feel good about saying this is it forever. That would make me feel really bad. So maybe let's just call it indefinite hiatus. And who knows, maybe after taking some time off, I may manage to come back and find a balance that could work a bit better for me. Maybe put something out here and there as I have the time, without any kind of regular schedule. That's sort of against my nature. I'm a very organized person, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to get things out on time and on schedule, even though it's a schedule that I created. So it doesn't make any sense, but that's the nature of OCD and all the other things that I have swirling around in my head. The website and all of the episodes and everything except for the Patreon will stay up, and I'll continue to use the Instagram account to share and socialize new gallery shows and artists that I'm interested in and all of that. So feel free to stay in touch and follow along there. So that's it, really. From the very first episode, I've always closed the show by saying this one simple, but to me really important phrase. I always like the idea of having some kind of closing statement at the end like that. Something that was simple enough to be memorable, but also concisely reflective of my ideals. And as we move into this next, frankly terrifying and uncertain chapter of the country, if you're in the US, and just new state of the world if you're not in the US, it's even more important than ever that we look out for one another, that we hold space for those that are less fortunate or less privileged, that we look out for the people around us, hug the ones that you love every day, and tell them how much they mean to you. So with that said, until next time, whenever that might be good to yourself and be good to each other.
When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we was all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we was all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we was all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we was all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? Can no one be well? But I dreamt we was all beautiful and strong. When the world is sick, can no one be well? But I dreamt we was all beautiful